She swore she would never again allow a man to cross her gates, but when the Highlander warrior arrived, wearing the tartan forbidden for decades, with eyes cold as steel and a presence that stole the air from the room, Marienne realized that some battles are not won with words, and that some surrenders begin exactly where the widow countess's pride ends. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like, because this story will captivate you from the first breath to the last. Ruthven Castle stood against the grey sky of the Scottish Highlands like a fortress of stone and silence. March 1784 brought sharp winds that moaned through the Gothic windows, but within the thick walls, Lady Marienne Ruthven had built something more impenetrable than any rampart: absolute control. She was 27 years old and carried widowhood like armor. Her husband, the Earl of Ruthven, had died 18 months earlier, officially from a sudden fever, unofficially from the poison. Of rumors that still circulated in the halls of the Scottish nobility. Marienne had inherited not only lands and titles, but also invisible enemies, hungry courtiers, and the dangerous reputation of being too beautiful to be left alone. She had learned quickly. Widowed women were seen as unclaimed property, and Marienne Ruthven belonged to no one. It was a cold morning when the butler, old Duncan, entered the library, where she was reviewing account books. His usually serene face bore a crease of worry between his brows. "Milady, correspondence has arrived from the MacRae clan." Marienne looked up from the figures, her fingers still holding the quill. Her red hair was fastened in an impeccable arrangement, but a few rebellious strands escaped, framing a face of delicate features and amber-green eyes that held the calculated coolness of one who had learned to distrust kindness. "From the MacRae clan?" she repeated, putting down the quill slowly. "I have no pending business with them." Duncan hesitated, extending the sealed parchment. "According to the letter, milady, they have business with you." Marienne broke the seal with a dry movement. She read in silence, and then, for the first time in months, a spark of true irritation crossed her controlled face. "They are sending me a guardian?" Her voice was low, dangerously calm. "I did not request a guardian, and I certainly did not request a Highlander within my walls. Milady, with the rumors." "About?" Duncan began cautiously. "Rumors do not kill, Duncan." Marienne stood up, her moss-green wool dress brushing the stone floor. "But men who believe women need to be protected against their own will certainly try to control." The butler took a deep breath before speaking again. "The Laird MacRae mentions in the letter that there have been incidents. Travelers attacked on the roads leading to your lands. He believes you may be in danger." Marienne walked to the window, arms crossed, watching the heather-covered hills in the distance. The wind rattled the ancient glass panes. "And why would a clan laird be so concerned about my safety, Duncan?" Duncan hesitated, as if weighing every word. "Milady, the late Earl was more than a political ally to the MacRae clan. He was the laird's personal friend, and there was an agreement of mutual protection between them, discreet but firm. The Earl offered support to the clan in difficult times, and in return, the laird gave his word that, should he ever need to, he would protect his family." Marienne closed her eyes for an instant. "And now that he is gone," she murmured. "Now, milady, the laird feels morally obligated to fulfill the promise he made to the Earl." Duncan lowered his voice. "And with the recent attacks and the rumors about disputes over your lands, he believes sending a warrior is a matter of honor and debt." The Countess straightened her posture, still facing away. "When does he arrive?" "Today, milady. At nightfall." Marienne closed her eyes for a moment, feeling frustration rise in her throat, but when she turned around, her face was once again serene, impenetrable. "Then prepare the guard's quarters, and make it clear to him, Duncan, this is my castle, and I do not obey orders from men who arrive uninvited." The sun began to set when Torin MacRae rode through the gates of Ruthven Castle on a black horse that seemed as relentless as its owner. He was 34 years old, 6 feet 4 inches tall, and carried on his broad shoulders not only the weight of well-maintained weapons, but also that of a lifetime denying that he deserved more than the role of an unnamed warrior. The bastard son of the former Laird MacRae, Torin had grown up amidst swords and silences. He had never been acknowledged. He had never been granted land, but he had earned respect, the kind that is won with blood and unwavering discipline. And now, for The first time since the laws against the Highlanders had been repealed 2 years prior, he wore the MacRae tartan with open pride, the thick wool fabric in shades of dark green, navy blue, and red wrapped around his hips, fastened by a wide leather belt. The cold Highland breeze pulled at the ends of the plaid as he dismounted in the stone courtyard. For 36 years, the Highlanders had been forbidden to wear their tartans, to carry on their traditions, to be who they were. Torin had grown up hiding his own identity, but now with the repeal of the Dress Act, he could finally move through the world as a whole man, and this newly acquired freedom brought with it an overwhelming presence. He did not smile. He did not greet anyone. He merely handed the reins of his horse to a nervous stable hand and ascended the castle steps with firm strides, his broadsword swinging at his hip, his dark blue gaze sweeping every shadow, every window, every vulnerable point of the structure. Duncan awaited him at the entrance. "Mr. MacRae, welcome to Ruthven Castle." Torin nodded briefly but said nothing. His eyes continued to map the surroundings, cold, calculating. He was not there to make friends. He was there because the Laird had ordered it, and Torin MacRae obeyed orders even when he disagreed with them. "Lady Ruthven will receive you in the main hall," Duncan informed him, guiding him through narrow corridors lit by torches. "Does she know why I am here?" Torin's voice was deep, rough, without unnecessary inflections. "She knows, and she is not pleased with the idea." Torin almost smiled. Almost. Noble women rarely are. Duncan shot him a warning glance but said nothing. He merely opened the double doors of the main hall and announced, "Lady Marienne Ruthven, I present to you Torin MacRae of the MacRae clan." Marienne stood near the fireplace, a glass of red wine in her hand, posture erect, chin high. The fire behind her created a golden halo around her silhouette, enhancing the color of her unbound hair, which now fell in soft waves over her shoulders. She wore a dark green velvet dress, with long sleeves and a modest neckline, but the fierce elegance with which she moved transformed any attire into armor. When Torin entered, she did not move, and he paused on the threshold, observing her with the same intensity he would use to assess a battlefield. The silence between them lasted too long. Marienne was the first to speak, her voice controlled, almost cold. "Mr. MacRae, I thank the Laird for his concern, but as you have certainly been informed, I did not request protection." Torin advanced slowly, each step measured, deliberate. He did not bow his head, he did not curtsy. He merely stopped 3 meters from her and replied, "I did not choose to be here, Lady Ruthven, but while I am, you will obey the security rules I establish." Marienne's eyes flashed. "This," she said, opening her arms in a gesture that encompassed the entire hall, "is my castle, and I do not obey men who arrive uninvited." Torin inclined his head slightly, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "Then your stubbornness is greater than your instinct for survival." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Noted." Marienne clenched her teeth, gripping the glass tighter than she intended. "My instinct for survival, Mr. MacRae, is precisely what has kept me alive and free until now. Without the help of arrogant warriors who believe swords solve everything. Swords solve real threats, Lady Ruthven. Sharp words only work in drawing rooms. And you think I don't know the difference?" Torin took a step forward, and something in the movement made Marienne instinctively retreat, not out of fear, but out of something she couldn't name. He was too big, too solid, too present. "I think," he said, voice low, dangerously calm, "that you are accustomed to controlling men with intellect and distance. But that doesn't work with those who want to see you dead." Marienne felt her heart quicken, not from the implied threat, but from the naked truth he had just thrown into the air between them. "Who said anyone wants to see me dead?" "No one needs to say." Torin crossed his arms, and the movement made the muscles beneath the linen shirt visibly tense. "Young widow, rich, no heirs, with valuable lands. You are a living target, milady, and pretending you're not only makes you more vulnerable." Marienne turned abruptly, returning close to the fireplace, hiding her expression, because he was right, and she hated that he was right. "How long do you intend to stay?" she asked, her back to him. "As long as necessary." "That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." Marienne took a deep breath, trying to regain control of the situation. When she turned again, her face was composed, cold. "Then let it be clear, Mr. MacRae. You may stay." "In the guards' quarters. You may do your rounds, but do not expect me to change my routine, my habits, or my decisions because of your presence. I do not need a protector, and I certainly do not need a supervisor." Torin studied her in silence for a long moment, and then, for the first time, something that might have been a ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Understood, milady. I do not supervise. I merely keep you alive." And without waiting for a reply, he turned and left the hall, leaving Marienne alone with the crackling fire and the strange sensation that she had just lost a battle she hadn't even known she was fighting. She brought her hand to the back of her neck, rubbing the skin that tingled for no apparent reason, and whispered to the empty hall, "What an insufferable man." But her voice trembled, slightly. Night fell upon Ruthven Castle with the dense weight of the Highlands. Marienne tried to work on the account books, but the figures danced on the page, making no sense. She tried to read, but the words were lost before forming images. Finally, she gave up and went to her bedroom window, pulling back the heavy velvet curtain. The courtyard was dark, illuminated only by a few strategically placed torches, and there, standing near the stables, was him, Torin MacRae, wearing the full kilt, the tartan swaying gently in the night breeze, his sword strapped to his back, his body still as a statue. But there was nothing inanimate about him. He radiated vigilance, contained strength, an ancestral presence that seemed larger than the man himself. Marienne held the edge of the curtain, unable to tear her eyes away. There was something unsettling about the way he moved through the world, as if every muscle knew exactly what to do, as if he were a living extension of the mountains around him, of the traditions that had been repressed for generations and were now reborn in him. He was Highlander, complete, untamed, and she felt something she couldn't name, something that frightened her more than any external threat. Torin turned his head, slowly, looking up, straight at her window. Marienne held her breath. He could not see her. The light in the room was extinguished, but even so she felt the weight of his gaze piercing the distance, touching her as if it were physical. She dropped the curtain and stepped back, her heart beating erratically. What an insufferable man! But for the first time in 18 months, Marienne Ruthven felt something beyond control, beyond fear disguised as strength. She felt alive, and that was, of all things, the most dangerous. The following 3 days brought a tense routine to Ruthven Castle. Marienne maintained her duties with her usual precision, overseeing the lands, meetings with administrators, endless correspondence. But now every movement was accompanied by a silent shadow, dressed in MacRae tartan. Torin spoke only when necessary. He did not invade her private spaces, but he was always present. In the hallway when she left her room in the morning, in the courtyard when she inspected the stables, leaning against the hall wall during meals, his blue eyes sweeping every door, every window, every unfamiliar face. Marienne tried to ignore him, but ignoring Torin MacRae was like ignoring a storm brewing on the horizon, technically possible, but profoundly imprudent. On the morning of the 4th day, Duncan entered the sewing room where Marienne was examining fabrics brought from Edinburgh, the butler's face bearing that diplomatic expression that usually preceded trouble. "Milady, Lord Thane Balfour requests an audience." Marienne did not look up from the silks stretched over the table. Lord Balfour did not send correspondence announcing a visit. "No, milady, but he is at the gates, with an escort of 6 men. Now Marienne looked up, her jaw tightening slightly. 6 men? For a courtesy visit? Duncan did not reply, but the answer was clear in the silence. "Where is MacRae?" "In the courtyard, milady. He has already seen the entourage arrive." Marienne let go of the fabric she was holding and smoothed the skirts of her burgundy wool dress. She took a deep breath, recomposing the mask of the imperturbable Countess, and nodded briefly. "Prepare the main hall. And Duncan, ensure MacRae is present." The butler hesitated, surprised. "You wish for a guard to be present during an audience with a lord?" Marienne met his eyes, her voice firm and cold. "I wish for my designated protector to perform his duty. If Lord Balfour brought 6 armed men for a visit, then I shall have mine too." Duncan nodded, and for the first time in days, something that might have been approval crossed his aged face. Lord Thane Balfour was 45 years old, his broad shoulders held by exquisitely tailored clothes, carefully combed greying hair, and a smile that many women would have called charming. Marienne called it calculated. He entered the main hall with the confidence of someone accustomed to being well received, his light eyes scanning the environment with an assessing interest before resting on Marienne, who was waiting near the fireplace, hands clasped in front of her body. "Lady Ruthven." He executed an elegant bow. "Each time I see you, I am convinced that Scottish poets should cease writing about mountains and dedicate their pens to the true wonder of the Highlands." Marienne did not smile. "Lord Balfour, I did not receive notice of your visit. I apologize for the informality." He advanced a few steps, slowly removing his leather gloves. "But I was passing through the area and could not resist the temptation to check that you were well. Rumors about incidents on the roads have been circulating." "Rumors often circulate, Lord Balfour. They rarely correspond to reality. Still, a woman alone, even one as capable as yourself." "Lady Ruthven is not alone." The grave voice cut across the hall like a drawn blade. Thane turned abruptly, and the amiable expression on his face wavered for a fraction of a second as Torin MacRae entered through the side door. The Highlander wore the full tartan, the broadsword visible on his back, and walked with that economy of movement that men trained to kill learned early. He did not stop until he was a few steps from Marienne, slightly ahead of her, his body positioned so that he partially blocked the line of sight between her and Balfour. Thane recovered his smile, but now there was tension around his eyes. "And who might you be, sir?" "Torin MacRae, of the MacRae clan." "Ah." Thane looked from Torin to Marienne, his eyebrows raised. "So the rumors about additional protection were true. Sensible precautions, Lord Balfour." Marienne moved around Torin, reclaiming control of the conversation. "Considering the incidents you yourself mentioned. Sensible, no doubt." Thane approached again, deliberately ignoring Torin. "But I must say, Lady Ruthven, that temporary protection does not replace the permanent security that a marital alliance would offer." And there it was, the true reason for the visit. Marienne maintained her serene expression, but felt her stomach clench. "I am not seeking marital alliances, Lord Balfour. A woman of your beauty and position should not bear such a burden alone." He stopped, too close, and Marienne felt Torin move almost imperceptibly beside her. "Allow me to ease your burdens. My lands border yours. The union would be natural." "My burdens are mine, Lord Balfour." Marienne raised her chin, her voice firm as an ice blade. "And I carry them very well." Thane smiled, but now there was a coldness in his eyes that his charm could not mask. "For how long, Lady Ruthven? Solitary widows become targets, and targets eventually fall. Then it is good that she is not solitary." Torin spoke again, and this time his voice carried something dangerous, a veiled promise that made Thane take an involuntary step back. The silence that followed was dense, charged with testosterone and poorly disguised territoriality. Marienne felt the shift in the air, the way the two men sized each other up, and something within her, instinct perhaps, recognized that Torin had just marked territory in a primitive and undeniable way. Thane regained his composure, but the mask of the elegant gentleman now had cracks. "Very well." He put his gloves back on, his movements sharp. "I see Lady Ruthven is protected. For now." He gave a short bow, his eyes fixed on Marienne. "But temporary protection ends, milady, and when it does, my offer will still stand." Marienne did not reply. She simply watched as he exited the hall, the entourage of 6 men following him like armed shadows. When the sound of boots faded down the corridors, the silence weighed again. Marienne slowly released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding and felt her shoulders drop slightly. "He didn't come here out of concern," she said, her voice low, almost to herself. "No." Torin remained in the same spot, still vigilant. "He came to establish presence, to give warning that he is waiting for me to fail, to make a mistake, to become vulnerable enough to accept his protection." Torin finally turned to face her, and for the first time Marienne saw something beyond military discipline in his blue eyes. There was understanding there, recognition of a battle he understood better than she cared to admit. "He won't give up," Torin said. Simple, direct. Marienne crossed her arms, her back rigid without looking at him. "I know." A long pause. The crackle of the fire in the hearth was the only sound. "You do not have to face them alone." Marienne turned sharply, and the movement was so quick it almost brought her too close to him. Her eyes met his, and there was fury there, but also something broken, something she struggled to conceal. "Do not offer me pity, MacRae." Her voice trembled slightly on the last word. "I don't know what to do with it." Torin did not back down. He did not look away. He simply stood there, solid as the mountains around them, and said in a low voice, "Then learn." And before Marienne could answer, he left the hall, leaving her alone with the fire and the strange sensation that the walls she had so carefully built around herself had just gained the first real crack. The afternoon brought another visitor. This one, however, needed no announcement. He simply entered where he pleased, as if he still had rights to Ruthven Castle. Alistair Ruthven, the late Earl's younger brother, was 31 years old and wore the perpetually dissatisfied expression of someone who felt life owed him more than it had delivered. He was lean, with sharp features, his brown eyes always calculating, always seeking an advantage. Marienne found him in the library uninvited, flipping through the account books she had left on the desk. "Alistair," her voice was pure ice, "I do not recall authorizing your entry into this room." He looked up, showing no embarrassment. "This is still the Ruthven family home, Marienne, or have you already forgotten? This is my home, inherited legally and legitimately. And these," she advanced and closed the account book with a dry snap, "are my private records." "Private?" Alistair tilted his head, a sarcastic smile on his lips. "The Ruthven lands have generated wealth for generations. My brother may have left them to you, but the blood that built this fortune is mine too. Your brother left a clear will. You received your portion. Do not touch what does not belong to you." "My portion," he spat the word. "A small property and a ridiculous annual income, while you, who barely knew my brother, before marrying him, got everything." Marienne felt the fury rising but kept her voice controlled. "I did not choose to marry your brother, Alistair. It was arranged by our parents, and while he lived, I fulfilled every duty of a wife. Do not blame me for decisions he made." "Decisions?" Alistair circled the desk, approaching her. "Or manipulations? Tell me, dear sister-in-law, what exactly did you do to convince him to leave everything in your hands?" The insinuation was clear, venomous. Marienne felt her cheeks burn, but she did not retreat. "Get out, now! Or what? You'll expel me from my family's house?" "Yes." The voice did not come from Marienne. It came from the doorway, where Torin MacRae was standing, his broad shoulders filling the frame, his expression so cold it seemed carved in stone. Alistair spun around, and for the first time since he had arrived, uncertainty crossed his face. "Who the devil are you?" "Someone who will throw you out if the lady asks." Torin advanced 2 steps, and the space in the library seemed to shrink. "And she won't need to ask twice." Alistair looked from Torin to Marienne, trying to regain superiority, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Hired a guard dog, Marienne. Is that what it's come to? Hiding behind rented muscle?" "I do not hide behind anyone." Marienne moved around the desk, standing side by side with Torin, and her voice took on the tone of authority she used when she needed to. "Remind everyone who was in command. But I also will not tolerate disrespect within my property. You have 10 seconds to leave, Alistair, and if you return uninvited, you will be forcibly escorted out." Alistair opened his mouth, closed it, and finally muttered something inaudible before passing Torin with exaggerated distance and slamming the door behind him as he left the library. The silence returned, heavy. Marienne went back behind the desk and sat down slowly, as if her legs had decided to stop sustaining her weight. She placed her hands on the polished wooden surface, fingers intertwined, staring fixedly at the closed account book. "He's right, you know." Her voice came out lower than she intended. "About one thing, at least." Torin did not move from his position near the door. "About what?" "I barely knew the Earl before I married him." She smiled without humor. "I was delivered as a chess piece in an alliance between families. I spent 8 years as the wife of a man who saw me as decorative property. And when he died," she paused, taking a deep breath, "when he died, for the first time in my life, I owned myself." Torin watched in silence, and Marienne didn't know if he understood or judged. She didn't have the courage to look up to find out. "That's why I don't accept protection easily, MacRae. Because every protection I've ever received has come with invisible chains. Men protecting me from other men, but always maintaining control over me in the process." "I do not want to control you." The sincerity in his voice made Marienne finally look up. Torin was still standing near the door, but now his shoulders had relaxed slightly, and there was something in the way he looked at her, without pity, without judgment, just understanding. "You say that now," Marienne smiled bitterly, "but men always say things like that, until they get what they want. I am not other men. Are you not?" Marienne tilted her head. "Then what are you, MacRae? Why are you really here? Obedience to your laird, or is there something more?" Torin did not answer immediately. He took 2 steps towards the desk, paused, and when he spoke, his voice was low, almost painfully honest. "I was assigned to protect you. That is true, but it is also true that," he hesitated, as if the words were costly, "that I have seen women used as bargaining chips. I have seen what men do when they think they have a right to something that doesn't belong to them, and I swore a long time ago that if I ever had the power to stop it, I would stop it." Marienne studied his face, searching for lies, manipulation, any sign that he was like the others, but she found only raw truth, the kind rarely seen in drawing-room conversations. "So you are idealistic," she said the word as if testing the taste. "I am realistic," Torin crossed his arms, "and the reality is that you are surrounded. Balfour wants your lands. Alistair wants what he believes he was denied, and there are likely others I have not yet seen." He paused. "They will not give up, and stubbornness, however admirable, does not stop swords." Marienne felt something tighten in her chest, because he was right, and admitting it even to herself was like admitting weakness. "And what do you suggest then? That I marry someone just to obtain permanent protection? That I exchange one type of prison for another?" "No." Torin took another step forward, and now he was close enough that Marienne had to lift her chin to meet his eyes. "I suggest you stop automatically treating potential allies as enemies, and let me do the job I was sent here for, which is to keep you alive and free." The last 2 words hung in the air between them, loaded with a meaning Marienne was not sure how to interpret. Before she could answer, hurried footsteps echoed in the corridor, and Duncan appeared in the doorway, his face troubled. "Milady, Reverend Wallace is here. He asked to see you. Said it is an urgent matter related to the morality of the Ruthven household." Marienne closed her eyes briefly. 3 visitors in one day. 3 men wanting something from her. 3 different forms of pressure. "Of course he is." She stood up, smoothing the skirts of her dress. "Where is he?" "In the main hall, milady." Marienne moved past Torin, but he lightly grasped her arm. The touch was brief, firm, without being possessive, and somehow it was enough to make her stop. "I will come with you." It was not a request, it was a declaration. Marienne wanted to say she didn't need him. She wanted to keep her armor intact, but the truth was, she was tired, and having someone by her side, even if it was a stubborn Highlander warrior she barely knew, felt for the first time not like weakness, but like a choice. "Come, then." She gently released her arm from his touch. "But do not interfere unless I ask you to." Torin nodded once, and together they walked down the corridors toward the next wolf disguised as a lamb. Reverend Wallace was 50 years old, his shoulders stooped from decades spent bent over scriptures, and a gaze that swung between pious and condemning with unsettling ease. He waited in the main hall with his hands clasped over his belly, an expression of one carrying the weight of divine responsibilities. When Marienne entered with Torin beside her, the Reverend's eyes narrowed visibly. "Lady Ruthven." His voice had that nasal quality of preachers accustomed to speaking to crowds. "Thank you for receiving me." "Reverend Wallace." Marienne remained standing, refusing to sit and give him the impression of genuine hospitality. Duncan mentioned an urgent matter. "Yes." The Reverend looked from Marienne to Torin and made no effort to hide his disapproval. "A matter of a moral nature." "Continue." "Prolonged widowhood, Lady Ruthven, is a gateway to temptation, a space for dangers, spiritual and social. Many believe that marriage is the remedy for community order. Publicly refusing it can attract censure." He said the words slowly, deliberately, as if explaining a complex concept to a child. "And God does not smile upon women who refuse the sacred yoke of matrimony. A woman alone, especially a young and," he made a calculated pause, "attractive one, becomes a source of scandal. And scandal stains not only the individual soul but the entire community." Marienne felt the fury boil but kept her voice glacial. "God also does not smile upon men who use his word to control what does not belong to them, Reverend. Wallace's face turned red. Control? My daughter, I merely seek to guide you to the right path. The presence of a man, he looked at Torin with disdain, a stranger, a warrior, in your home without a matrimonial bond, is unacceptable. Tongues are already wagging. Then tell the tongues. Marienne advanced one step, and now there was genuine fire in her voice, that MacRae is here as designated protection by the MacRae clan, that I did not ask for his presence, but neither do I fear reputations built on the gossip of people who have nothing better to do than judge the lives of others. Young woman, and also tell them, she interrupted him, her voice sharp as broken glass, that if you truly cared about my soul, you would have come in the months following. My husband's death when I was grieving, but you did not come. You only appeared now when there are men willing to benefit from my moral vulnerability. Curious, don't you think? The silence that followed was deadly. Wallace opened and closed his mouth, searching for words, but Marienne was not finished. My morality is not your bargaining chip, Reverend, and if God truly expects me to marry merely to placate gossip, then perhaps I should have a direct conversation with him, without intermediaries. Wallace looked at Torin as if expecting the warrior to intervene, to control the insolent woman, but Torin remained motionless, almost smiling, not with his mouth, but with his eyes. The Reverend realized he would not win this battle, not today. May God have mercy on your soul, Lady Ruthven, he said finally, his voice laden with theatrical disapproval, and may the Lord protect you from the consequences of your rebelliousness. He left without another word, his black cassock sweeping the stone floor. When the door closed, Marienne felt her legs tremble. She walked to the fireplace and braced her hands on the cold stone, breathing slowly, trying to control the shaking that threatened to take over her body. 3, she said in a low voice, almost laughing. 3 men in one day, all wanting something from me, all thinking they have the right to an opinion about my life. Torin approached slowly, stopping beside her, looking into the fire. You faced them well. Faced them. Marienne turned her face to him, and there was genuine weariness there now, the armor finally cracking completely. I drove them away for today, but they will return. Balfour with offers, Alistair with demands, Wallace with sermons, and eventually, her voice broke slightly. Eventually I won't have the strength to keep fighting alone. Torin did not answer with words. Instead, he did something unexpected. He placed his hand on her shoulder. The touch was firm, warm through the velvet of her dress, and completely non-invasive. Not possessive, just present. Marienne froze, not because she disliked it, but because she liked it too much, because it had been so long since anyone had touched her with anything other than self-interest. That feeling, that simple warmth, that silent solidarity, was almost painful. She raised her eyes to his, and saw only honesty there. You are not alone, Torin said, his voice low, grave. Not while I am here. Marienne wanted to respond. She wanted to say something sharp, protective, that maintained distance, but the words did not come. Torin slowly withdrew his hand, as if he knew prolonging the touch would be too much for both of them, and stepped back. Neither of them said anything, but the air between them grew thick, charged with something neither dared to name. And for the first time since the Earl of Ruthven had died, Marienne felt that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry everything alone, even if admitting that was the most terrifying thing she had ever done. The following week brought a fine, persistent rain to the Highlands, the type of weather that seeped into bones and made every movement heavier. But Marienne's responsibilities did not wait for the sun. She needed to visit the village bordering her lands, check the grain warehouse, and resolve disputes among tenants. Duncan suggested postponing. Torin suggested nothing. He simply prepared 2 horses and waited in the courtyard, his tartan already soaked by the drizzle, his expression as unperturbed as stone in a storm. Marienne descended the main entrance steps, wearing a thick wool cloak over a practical travel dress, her hood protecting her hair from the dampness. When she saw Torin already mounted, something between irritation and something dangerously close to gratitude crossed her chest. I did not ask you to come. I know. Torin extended his hand to help her mount. But you're coming anyway. Marienne looked at the offered hand, large, calloused, firm, and for a moment considered refusing out of principle. But the rain was getting heavier, and foolish pride kept no one dry. She accepted the aid, and his fingers closed around hers with calculated care, as if he were afraid to squeeze too hard and hurt her. The touch lasted only seconds, but Marienne felt the warmth penetrate her leather gloves, and a strange sensation ran down her spine. They rode in silence for the first few miles, the muddy road making the journey slow. Marienne kept her eyes fixed on the path ahead, but she was conscious, painfully conscious, of Torin's presence beside her, of the way he moved with the horse, fluid, natural, of the way his eyes constantly swept the surrounding trees, never resting, always vigilant. And there was something more, something she had been noticing for the past few days, but only now, alone on the empty road, did she allow herself to acknowledge. The way he looked at her. It was not Balfour's assessing look, calculating worth and advantage. It was not Wallace's critical gaze, weighing imaginary sins. It was different, intense, yes, but also confused, as if Torin were trying to decipher a puzzle he did not expect to find, as if she disturbed him as much as he disturbed her. Marienne firmly pushed the thought away. She could not, should not, allow herself to speculate about what a Highlander warrior thought or felt. That was dangerous territory, the kind that ended with broken hearts and ruined reputations. But then Torin spoke, his low voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Do you always do this?" Marienne looked at him, surprised. "Do what?" "Visit the lands personally, resolve disputes. Most nobles send administrators." "Most nobles do not care about the people who work their lands." Marienne adjusted the reins, looking ahead again. "My husband never came here. He sent men to collect, but never to listen." Torin was silent for a moment, processing. "And you listen." It was not a question. It was an observation. "I listen." Marienne felt something tighten in her chest. "Because I know what it's like not to be heard." She did not expect him to understand, but when she glanced at him, she saw something in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, as if he too knew the weight of being invisible in crowded rooms. Torin did not reply with words. He merely nodded once, slow, and something in the gesture made Marienne feel she had just revealed more than she intended. The village was small, composed of about 20 stone and thatch houses clustered around a muddy central square. When Marienne arrived, people came out despite the rain, some greeting her respectfully, others with problems requiring immediate attention. Torin dismounted first, and for the first time Marienne saw genuine curiosity in the villagers' eyes. Highlanders wearing tartan were still a novelty, a symbol of newly regained freedom, and Torin, with his imposing stature and undeniable presence, was impossible to ignore. He spoke to no one. He simply positioned himself close to Marienne as she conducted conversations, settled land boundary disputes, and listened to complaints about the grain warehouse. But his presence changed the dynamic. Men who had previously spoken aggressively now measured their words. Women who had felt intimidated now seemed more comfortable, and Marienne realized with quiet surprise that having Torin there did not make her look weak. It made her look protected. And there was a difference. They were leaving the village, the path back already begun, when Torin abruptly stopped his horse. Marienne looked at him, confused. "What?" Silence. His voice was hoarse, and his hand was already on the hilt of his sword. His eyes swept the dense forest on both sides of the road. "Someone is following us." Marienne felt her heart race but kept her voice steady. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." Torin looked at her, and for the first time there was real urgency in his expression. "When I say so, you gallop. Don't look back. Don't stop. Just run to the castle. I won't leave you." "It is not a request," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "It is an order." But before Marienne could answer, the trees erupted in motion. 5 masked men emerged from the forest, armed with swords, and knives surrounding them. They did not speak. They merely advanced in a precise, dangerous formation. Torin reacted like lightning. He dismounted before Marienne could blink, drawing his broadsword in a fluid movement practiced 1,000 times. The first attacker fell before completing 3 steps, contained by Torin's precise strike. The second attempted to flank, but Torin spun, blocked, and countered with ruthless efficiency. Marienne watched, paralyzed atop her horse, as the silent warrior she knew transformed into something entirely different. He was a storm. He was a predator. He was fate deciding when and where to strike. Every movement was economical, without waste. He did not fight with anger. He fought with a cold, terrifying focus. He deflected blades by the smallest margin and counterattacked with enough force to fell opponents, but they were many, and he was one. One of the attackers slipped past his defense, rushing toward Marienne. She screamed, struggling to control the frightened horse as the man grabbed the reins and pulled. Torin turned his head, saw, and something in his face changed. It was no longer military discipline. It was protective instinct. He abandoned his defense, lunged forward and intercepted the attacker before he could reach Marienne. The impact was so strong that the man fell immediately, but in doing so, Torin exposed himself. A blade sliced across his arm, tearing the fabric and staining his sleeve, but Torin did not even flinch. He simply turned, trapped the opponent's arm, completely disarming him, and slammed him to the ground. The last two men looked at their fallen companions, at Torin marked by the signs of the fight, and made the only sensible decision. They ran. Torin did not pursue them. He simply stood, breathing heavily, sword still drawn, his eyes scanning the trees for any remaining threat, and then slowly, he turned to Marienne. "Are you hurt?" His voice was hoarse, strained, and there was something wild still gleaming in his blue eyes. Marienne dismounted on shaky legs, nearly falling, but managed to stay upright. No, I'm fine." She looked at his arm, where the fabric darkened beneath his hand. "You're hurt." Torin looked at his arm as if he only just realized it. "I've had worse." The indifference in his voice, the casual way he treated a wound he ignored, as if it were nothing, made something inside Marienne snap. She stepped forward, grabbing his wrist with both hands, forcing him to look at her. "Don't talk like that." Her voice trembled, and she no longer tried to hide it. "As if your life doesn't matter." Torin stood motionless, looking at her hands on his, and when he spoke, there was genuine surprise in his voice. "I didn't know it mattered to you." Marienne should have let go. She should have stepped back, recomposed her armor, said something cold and distant, but she couldn't. "It matters. Because you are my responsibility while you are under my roof." The words came out fast, defensive. Torin looked into her eyes, and something shifted in his expression. Something warm, dangerous, that made Marienne's heart beat faster. "Liar," he said, his voice low, almost a rasp. Marienne held her breath. She had no answer, because he was right, and they both knew it. The journey back was different. Torin's horse was limping slightly, a superficial wound, but enough to make a long ride dangerous, and with his arm bleeding, Torin couldn't control two horses properly. The solution was obvious and terrifying. "Ride with me," Torin said, already adjusting the reins with his good hand. "We'll let your horse loose. He knows the way back." Marienne looked at his horse at Torin and felt something tighten in her chest. It wasn't fear. It was the recognition that riding with him, body against body, would be crossing a line she had been carefully avoiding. But there was no alternative. She accepted the hand he offered and climbed up, sitting in front of him, between his arms that held the reins. His body was solid against her back, warm despite the cold rain, and Marienne felt every muscle, every controlled breath. Torin gripped the reins with unnecessary force, trying to ignore her scent, something delicate, floral, that contrasted brutally with the smell of battle and wet earth. Trying to ignore her weight against his chest, the curve of her waist beneath his hands, the way she fit perfectly there. "It's just duty," he repeated mentally, "just responsibility, just work." But his body no longer believed that lie, because in the last few days, Torin had begun to realize something that frightened him more than any battle. Marienne Ruthven was not just a woman he needed to protect. She was the first woman in years he wanted to protect, that he wanted to know, that he stayed awake at night thinking about, the way she lifted her chin when challenged, the sharp intelligence in her amber-green eyes, the strength hidden beneath all that fragile elegance. He watched her fight against men who tried to control her, and he wanted to stand by her side, not in front, not controlling, just beside her. And this was new, dangerous, unacceptable. Torin MacRae could not allow himself to feel, not like this, not for her. But when Marienne relaxed slightly against him, exhaustion finally overcoming tension, and her head lightly touched his shoulder, Torin closed his eyes and allowed himself for just a moment to feel her warmth against his chest. and to admit, only to himself, that he was losing a war he hadn't even known he was fighting. They rode in silence back to the castle, where Duncan was waiting, alarmed by the visible remnants of the battle. But when Torin helped Marienne dismount, and their eyes met briefly, they both knew. Something had changed on that road, and there was no going back. The days following the attack brought a subtle but undeniable change to Ruthven Castle. Torin recovered quickly. The cut on his arm was superficial, and he refused assistance beyond basic bandaging. But Marienne insisted the local doctor examine him, and for the first time Torin did not argue. He simply watched as she organized everything, her voice firm as she gave orders, and something in his chest tightened strangely, as if he were rediscovering a long-forgotten sensation, the gratitude of being cared for. Marienne began seeking him out in the corridors. Not obviously, she still maintained the appearance of casual coincidences. She would descend to the main hall exactly when she knew he would return from his morning round. She would go to the library at the time he usually checked the windows. She would walk through the inner gardens when she saw him training in the courtyard, and Torin did the same. He would appear near her quarters when he knew she would. Be coming down for breakfast. He would pass by the sewing room more often than necessary. He would stand near the library in the afternoons, pretending to inspect old locks. Neither of them mentioned it, but both knew. The third night after the attack, Marienne went down to the main hall, unable to sleep. The full moon illuminated the stained glass windows, creating patterns of red and blue light on the stone floor. She intended only to walk for a bit, to calm her restless mind. But when she entered, she found Torin sitting by the nearly extinguished fireplace, a book open on his lap, the faint light of the embers illuminating his angular profile. Marienne stopped at the threshold, considering retreating. But then Torin looked up, saw her, and something in his gaze prevented her from leaving. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice low, so as not to echo in the empty hall. "The full moon always makes me restless." Marienne advanced slowly, curiosity overcoming caution. "And you? Don't warriors need rest?" "They do." Torin closed the book, but kept his finger marking the page. "But old habits are hard to break. I spent years sleeping with one eye open. Now, in a comfortable bed, the body doesn't know what to do with so much silence." Marienne approached closer, and for the first time truly noticed what he was reading. She tilted her head, genuine surprise crossing her face. "I didn't expect to find a Highlander warrior reading Greek philosophy." Torin did not smile, but something at the corner of his mouth softened. "And I didn't expect to find a countess who judges men by their appearance." The tone was light, teasing, and Marienne felt heat rise in her neck. Not from shame, from something more dangerous. "I grant you that point." She sat in the armchair next to him, maintaining a respectable distance, but close enough to feel the warmth of the fireplace. "Where did you learn?" Torin reopened the book, looking at the pages, as if revisiting an old memory. "A monk taught me. Brother Benedict. He lived in the monastery near the MacRae lands." There was a pause, and when Torin continued, his voice carried the weight of something unsaid. He said that men who only know how to fight end up losing themselves, that swords protect bodies but words protect souls. Marienne studied his profile, the strong jaw, the thin scar crossing his eyebrow, the way his fingers held the book with reverent care. There were layers to this man she hadn't expected, a depth that contradicted the image of the silent warrior. "And you?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. "Did you lose yourself?" Torin closed the book completely now, placing it on the side table with deliberate care. When he looked at Marienne, there was something in his blue eyes she couldn't decipher. Vulnerability mixed with strength, confusion mixed with certainty. Until a few weeks ago, he paused for a long time, as if weighing every word. "I thought I had." The silence that followed was dense, charged with unspoken meaning. Marienne felt her heart race, aware that they were crossing dangerous territory, that conversations like this, in the dark, alone, led to places from which there was no easy return. She should stand up. She should make a polite observation, retreat to the safety of formal distance. Instead, she heard herself saying, "And now?" Torin did not answer immediately. He just watched. Her with that intensity that made Marienne feel he saw beyond the surface, beyond the carefully constructed armor. He saw the woman she hid from everyone else. "Now," he finally said, his voice husky, I think I'm starting to find myself. Marienne held her breath. There were so many possible answers, so many ways to deflect, to return to safety. But the raw truth in his gaze deserved an equivalent honesty. We shouldn't be here, she said, but did not move. Alone. At night. Torin stood up slowly, and the movement made the shadows dance across his face, highlighting the strong bone structure, the width of his shoulders beneath the linen shirt. He did not approach. He just stood there, looking at her. I know. Marienne should also stand up. She should leave. But she remained seated, looking at him, feeling something dangerous grow in the space between them. Then why don't you leave? Torin took one step forward, just one, but it was enough to completely change the dynamic of the air around them. When he spoke, his voice was low, laden with naked truth. Because you aren't leaving either. And he was right. Marienne was not. She couldn't. Because for the first time in years, she wanted to stay. She wanted to know what would happen if she stopped running, stopped protecting herself, stopped keeping everyone at a safe distance. She stood up slowly, and now they were less than a meter apart, close enough to see the slight quickening of his breath, to notice how his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, as if he were fighting the impulse to touch her. Torin, she began, but did not know how to finish. He held out his hand, not to grasp her, not to pull her. He simply offered it, palm up, waiting, an invitation, not a demand. Marienne looked at his hand, large, calloused, with scars from old battles marking his knuckles. It was a hand that knew how to kill, but that also knew how to hold books with care. That knew how to protect without suffocating. She placed her hand in his. The touch was electric. Torin's fingers closed around hers, firm but gentle, and neither of them moved. They just stood there, hands intertwined, looking at each other as if they were on the edge of a cliff and didn't know whether to step back or jump. Marienne felt his thumb trace a slow circle over her fingers, a gesture so small, yet so intimate, that it made something inside her melt. We can't, she whispered, but did not release his hand. I know. Torin took another step forward, and now they were so close that Marienne had to lift her face to meet his eyes. People will talk. They are already talking. This will complicate everything. It is already complicated. Marienne laughed softly, humorlessly, but with truth. Then why does it feel so right? Torin raised his other hand, hesitant, and touched her face with the lightness of one who fears breaking something precious. His fingers traced the line of her jaw, moved up to brush away a loose strand of hair, and Marienne closed her eyes, unable to process the intensity of what she felt. No one touched her like this, as if she was something valuable, as if she mattered beyond title, lands, position, as if she were just Marienne. I don't know what to do with this, she admitted, her voice trembling. With you, with what I feel when you are near. Neither do I. Torin inclined his forehead until it rested against hers, their breaths mingling. But I also can no longer pretend I don't feel it. They stayed like that, so close that a minimal movement would make them touch completely, but maintaining that impossible space between almost and consummated. Marienne's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it, and then Torin pulled back, slowly, painfully, as if every inch of distance cost him something physical. He released her hand, stepped back 2 paces, and when he spoke, his voice was controlled but strained. You should go. It was not rejection. It was protection. Before I forget why I need to keep my distance. Marienne wanted to protest. She wanted to close that distance again, to find out what would happen if they stopped resisting. But the honor in his gesture, the visible effort he made to do the right thing, touched something deep within her. He wasn't rejecting her. He was protecting her. From herself. From the consequences. Good night, MacRae, she said, finally, her voice hoarse. Good night, milady. Marienne turned and walked toward the door, each step costing more than the last. But when she reached the threshold, she looked back one last time. Torin was still standing in the same spot, looking at her as if he were memorizing every detail, and in the faint light of the embers, Marienne saw something devastating. He smiled, not a grand smile, just a tiny movement at the corner of his mouth, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to completely steal the air from her lungs, because that smile was just for her, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would never forget it. The following morning brought the first surprise. Marienne opened her bedroom door and nearly stepped on something left on the threshold. She looked down and found a small bouquet of wildflowers, purple heather, white daisies, a few green sprigs, tied with thick linen thread. There was no note. There was no explanation, but Marienne knew. She picked up the flowers carefully, carried them inside, and placed them in a makeshift jar on her dressing table. She touched the delicate petals, an involuntary smile curving her lips. The next day, there were more flowers, different but equally simple and beautiful. And the day after, and the day after that. Torin never mentioned it. He never acknowledged it, but always at night, when the castle slept, he would leave a small silent offering. And Marienne kept everyone. A week after the nighttime conversation, Marienne was in the music room and a small intimate space on the second floor, rarely used. The old harpsichord needed tuning, but she liked the imperfect sound. It reminded her that beauty did not need to be flawless to exist. She was playing an old melancholy piece, her fingers moving over the keys with a familiarity born of years of practice. Music had always been a refuge, the one time she could express emotions she would never dare to verbalize. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the door open. She didn't notice the presence until a grave voice spoke. "You play beautifully." Marienne stopped abruptly, turning around. Torin was standing in the doorway, his shoulder leaning against the frame, his arms crossed. But there was no military stiffness in his posture now. There was something soft, almost vulnerable. "How long have you been there?" she asked, her heart racing. "Long." "Enough?" He entered slowly. "Duncan said you played, but I had never heard it. You hide it." "I don't hide it. I just prefer to play alone." "Why?" Marienne looked at the keys, her fingers tracing nervous patterns on the polished wood. "Because music is the one thing I do only for myself. Not because someone expects it, not because it is a countess's role, just because I like it." Torin approached until he was beside the harpsichord, looking at her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. "Continue." It was not an order. It was a request. Marienne hesitated, but something in his gaze convinced her. She began to play again, and this time the music was different, lighter, less melancholy, as if his presence changed what her fingers conveyed. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was full, comfortable. "Thank you for the flowers," Marienne said softly without looking at him. "I don't know what you're talking about." The answer came, quickly, but there was hidden humor in his voice. Marienne finally looked up and met that small smile again, the one that was only hers. "Of course you don't," she smiled back. "And I'm certainly not keeping all of them in a hidden basket in the closet." What a coincidence. His eyes sparkled. "I also don't stay awake thinking about which arrangement to leave the next day." They looked at each other, and something passed between them. Understanding, complicity, the recognition that they were building something dangerous and inevitable, and neither of them wanted to stop. She should have let go. He should have backed away, but the whole world seemed to have stopped spinning. And there, in the music room flooded with soft afternoon light, Marienne and Torin understood something fundamental. They had already crossed the line, and there was no turning back. The storm arrived without warning in the third week of April, bringing winds that howled through the crevices of Ruthven Castle's ancient stones, like furious creatures searching for entry. Rain beat against the stained glass windows with a force that threatened to shatter the colored glass, and thunder shook the foundations of the centuries-old building. Marienne had dismissed the servants earlier, realizing the storm would be worse than usual. Duncan had arranged preparations, locked windows, extra torches lit, reinforced doors. But when night fully descended, and the wind gained a truly terrifying strength, Marienne decided to make a final round herself. She wore a thick linen chemise under a dark green velvet robe, her hair loose, falling in waves over her shoulders, her bare feet silent on the cold stones. She carried a candle protected by glass, the flame flickering with every draught. When she entered the main hall, she found all the windows already checked, the locks reinforced, and Torin stood near the last window, looking out at the storm through the thick glass. He wore only leather breeches and a linen shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest, as if he had been woken by the storm and hurried down. His dark hair was disheveled, falling over his forehead, and in the unstable torchlight, He looked less like a warrior and more like a man, vulnerable, tired, beautifully imperfect. Marienne stopped at the threshold, considering retreating before he noticed, but then thunder exploded so close it made the entire castle shake, and she let out a small, involuntary cry. Torin turned immediately, his hand instinctively going to the sword he was not wearing, and his eyes met hers across the dark hall. Marienne. It was not milady. For the first time, he had used only her name. I thought you were sleeping. The storm. She took a few steps forward, her voice muffled by the sound of the rain. I wanted to check the windows. I've already checked them. Torin did not move from his position, but his eyes followed her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. Everything is secure. Good. Marienne should thank him and leave, return to the safety of her room, away from the temptation he represented. Then I will... Another clap of thunder. This time the force was so great that one of the torches went out, plunging half the hall into deep darkness. Marienne took an instinctive step forward, seeking the light, and was suddenly much closer to Torin than she intended. He did not retreat. He just stood, there looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully decipher. Conflict, desire, resistance, surrender, all mixed in a whirlwind that mirrored the storm outside. You should go back to your room. His voice was hoarse, strained. It's not safe to be here. Because of the storm? No. Torin took a step back, as if he needed physical distance to maintain control. Because of me. Marienne felt her heart quicken. There were so many ways to interpret that phrase, but the way he looked at her, the visible tension in every muscle made the true meaning clear. Torin, I can't anymore, he interrupted, and there was raw pain in his voice. I can't pretend anymore that you aren't in my head every second of the day, that I don't wake up thinking about you, that I don't stand watching you play music just to hear your breath change, that I don't leave flowers because it's the only thing I can give without crossing lines I shouldn't cross. Marienne held her. Breath, tears burning in her eyes without permission. You think it's just you? Her voice came out shaky, too honest. Do you think I don't look for you in the corridors? That I don't come down at night hoping to find you? That I don't keep every flower as if it were treasure? Marienne, don't... He took another step back but hit the wall, cornered. Don't make this harder. Harder. She advanced, closing the distance he tried to create. Torin, I spend whole days fighting what I feel. I pretend it doesn't matter when you're near, that I don't notice when you smile, that my heart doesn't skip a beat when you say my name. Hard is lying to myself every hour of every day. Torin closed his eyes, his hands clenching into fists at his sides, and Marienne saw the battle he was fighting internally. She saw the exact moment when the resistance began to crack. I am not a good man, Marienne. He opened his eyes, and there was darkness there, but also brutal honesty. I'm not a noble. I have no lands, no titles, nothing to offer. I am a bastard, a warrior, a man who only knows how to protect and destroy. Marienne raised her hand, lightly touching his chest, feeling his heart beating wildly beneath her palm. Do you think I care about that, about titles, about what others will think? You should. But he didn't pull away from the touch. Your reputation? My reputation was built on a marriage I did not choose, a widowhood I did not ask for, and expectations I never wanted to meet. She took another step, and now they were so close she could feel his heat through the thin shirt. But with you, for the first time, I choose. Torin looked at her as if he were seeing something impossible, as if he couldn't believe someone would willingly choose him. The air between them changed. A spark ran through the narrow space. Intent, danger, promise. He struggled to remain whole. She struggled against the impulse to break him. It was as if they both knew that a single step would put them on a path of no return. I am your guardian, he murmured, his voice hoarse, as if reminding himself, trying to erect an inner wall. She tilted her face toward his, not touching him, just letting the space tremble between them. And tonight, she whispered, with a courage that tasted of surrender, you are mine. The words hit him like a silent blow. Torin inhaled sharply, as if something inside him finally yielded, and, before he could think, he pulled her to him, his arms enveloping her, his face descending to her neck in an almost reverent gesture. His warm breath touched her sensitive skin, and the way he whispered there, don't say that, not like that. made Marienne tremble because it sounded like a plea and a contained threat at the same time. In the high shadow of the elevated corridor, someone saw. An elderly chambermaid of the castle, a servant since girlhood, from the MacRae clan, molded in modesty and loyalty to the clan's values, stopped with the bundle of firewood in her arms. Her eyes widened as she witnessed the widow Countess surrendered in the arms of the man who was only supposed to protect her. Shock ran across her face, a mixture of wounded devotion and fear of straying from the rules. Without daring to make a sound, she retreated 2 steps, crossed herself, and hurried away as if fleeing a forbidden sight, already feeling the scene burn in her. Mind ready to whisper among the kitchens like a scandal about to be born, but down below in the hall, neither of them even imagined they had been seen. "If I keep touching you now," his voice was rough, dangerous, "I won't be able to stop." Marienne lifted her eyes, meeting his, and let all the truth show. "Then don't stop." For a moment suspended in time, neither of them moved. They just breathed together, paused on the verge of something irrevocable. And then Torin broke. He pulled Marienne to him with an urgency that stole the air from her lungs, one hand going to her loose hair and the other to her waist, and met her in an intense kiss, which seemed to carry years of restraint. The kiss shook her. It was not hesitant, it was deep, charged with everything they had never said aloud. His lips were firm and intense, but also reverent, as if he were memorizing every second. Marienne responded with equal intensity, gripping his shirt for balance, feeling the contained tension in his body, as if all the weight of that moment was in the touch. Torin let out a ragged sound against her mouth, as if it broke his control. He turned her, pressing her against the cold stone wall, and the intensity made Marienne gasp for a second. "Marienne?" He whispered her name like a prayer, like a curse, like adoration. His hands traveled up the curve of her waist, and the gesture ripped a sound from her that she didn't even know she was holding back. "Torin." Let his face find her neck, and the contact made something in her tremble, while Marienne buried her fingers in his dark hair, pulling him closer, as if afraid the moment would dissolve. His hands went to the fabric of her robe, an almost unconscious gesture, and she felt the air between them catch as if the world waited for the next second along with them. Torin reached the 3rd button, his breath heavy against her neck, and suddenly stopped. He froze completely, his hands still. On the buttons, his body rigid as stone. "No." The word came out rough, pained. "Not like this." Marienne opened her eyes, confused, still dizzy with desire. "What?" Torin drew back sharply as if touching her burned him. His hands were visibly trembling now, and there was genuine torment on his face. He ran a hand through his hair, breathing raggedly, looking at everything but her. "I can't," he said, his voice broken. "I can't do this to you." Marienne felt as if she had been thrown into ice water. Confusion, shame, rejection, everything mixed in a painful whirl. "I don't..." She began to rebutton her robe with trembling fingers. "I thought you wanted to..." "I do." Torin finally looked at her, and there was so much naked desire in his eyes that Marienne felt the impact physically. "God, Marienne, I want to so badly it hurts, but not like this, not when it means destroying you." "Destroying?" Tears were burning now, threatening to fall. "Torin, I am here, because I choose to be. No one is forcing me. Not now, but tomorrow." He took another step back, placing a safe distance between them. "Tomorrow, when the castle wakes up, when the servants see, when the rumors start, you will lose everything, your lands, your position, your freedom, and I..." His voice failed. "I would be the man who took that from you." Marienne wiped away the tears with anger, frustration exploding. "Do you think I care what they think? About a reputation built on hypocrisy and judgments? You should." Torin held her wrists gently when she tried to touch him again. "Because I care. I care about you too much to be selfish like this." "Selfish?" Marienne pulled her wrists, but he didn't let go. "Selfish would be kissing me like that and then pretending it means nothing. Selfish would be making me feel this and then leaving me alone." "I know." The pain in his voice was palpable. "And forgive me for both. Torin, please." She didn't have enough pride left to hide what she was feeling now. "Don't do this. Don't leave me like this." He touched her face one last time, his thumb tracing the line of her tear-wet cheek, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute truth. "You deserve more than I can give, Marienne. You deserve a man who can marry you publicly without fear, who can protect not just your body, but your reputation too. He paused, swallowing hard. I am just a warrior, and warriors do. Not stay with countesses, not without destroying them in the process. But if I stay now, Torin interrupted her, his voice hoarse with contained desperation, if I keep touching you, kissing you, I won't stop. I'll take everything you're offering. And tomorrow when you wake up and realize what you lost because of one night, you will hate me, and I could not bear to see hatred in your eyes. Marienne opened her mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come, because part of her, the rational part that spent years surviving in a world that didn't forgive women, knew he was right. Torin released her wrist slowly and took a step back, then another, placing physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm opening between them. Forgive me, he said one last time, his voice broken, and turned toward the door. Torin, Marienne whispered, but he didn't stop. She watched as he crossed the hall, his shoulders rigid, his hands still visibly trembling. When he reached the door, he stopped for a moment, his hand on the frame as if he were fighting the impulse to return, but he did not return. The door closed with a soft, final sound, and Marienne was left alone in the dark hall, leaning against the cold wall, with the taste of him still on her lips and a terrible emptiness in her chest. She slid down the wall until she sat on the stone floor, her knees drawn up to her chest, and finally allowed herself to cry. Not from simple sadness, but from frustration, unfulfilled desire, and the painful recognition that he was right, and she hated him for it. She hated that he was too honorable to take what she freely offered. She hated that he protected her, even from herself. She hated that he made her feel safe and desired, and then pulled back because he wanted to preserve exactly those things for her. But more than anything, she hated that she loved him even more for it. In the empty corridors of the castle, Torin walked quickly, almost running, trying to put distance between himself and the temptation that had nearly destroyed him. His hands were still trembling, his body still burned with the memory of her touch, and every fiber of his being screamed to go back. He leaned against the cold wall of a dark corridor, closed his eyes, and let his head lightly hit the stone. He had done the right thing. He knew it rationally. But every part of him that wasn't rational wanted to go back, fall to his knees before her, and beg forgiveness for being a coward disguised as honorable. Torin opened his eyes, looking at his own hands in the faint light of a distant torch. They were still trembling. They still carried the sensation of her skin, her warmth, the absolute surrender she had offered, and he had refused it, because loving her meant protecting her, even from himself, especially from himself. But as he walked through the empty corridors toward the guards' quarters, Torin admitted only to himself the truth he had been avoiding for weeks. He was no longer just a protector. He was a man desperately, irrevocably in love. And that, of all things, was the most dangerous. The storm continued until dawn, winds howling like an endless lament. And in separate rooms, Marienne and Torin stayed awake, burning with memories of what almost happened and what could never be. Both were burning, but he chose honor, and she hated loving him even more for it. The 5 days following the storm were the longest Marienne had ever lived. Ruthven Castle, which once seemed too large, now felt small. Every corridor a possibility of encounter that she simultaneously yearned for and feared. Every meal in the main hall was an exercise in not looking where she knew he would be. Torin carried out his rounds with mechanical precision. He checked doors, windows, walls. He spoke only what was necessary with Duncan, and when he had to be in the same room as Marienne, he maintained a respectable distance, his eyes fixed on anything but her. But Marienne felt the weight of his gaze when he thought she wasn't noticing. She felt the tension in the air when they passed each other in the narrow corridors, and on silent nights when the castle slept, she still found flowers on her doorstep. He kept leaving them, and she kept keeping them. Neither of them mentioned the storm, the kiss, the words spoken, as if ignoring what happened could undo it. But it couldn't. On the morning of the 6th day, Duncan brought news that changed everything. "Milady, correspondence has arrived from Lord Balfour." The butler handed over the sealed parchment with a worried expression. "He requests a formal meeting. He says there is an urgent matter related to the Ruthven lands that needs to be discussed." Marienne broke the seal, read quickly, and felt her stomach clench. The words were polite, but the veiled threat was clear. Balfour wanted access to the boundary records of the lands. He claimed there were inconsistencies that needed to be resolved before he was forced to seek legal mediation. It was a calculated move. He was testing how far he could push before she completely yielded. "Will he be coming tomorrow?" Duncan asked, observing her face. "No." Marienne folded the parchment with controlled movements. "I will reply that the records are in order and that there is no need for a meeting. And Duncan," she paused, a decision forming, "ask MacRae to come to the library. I need to speak with him." Something crossed the butler's face, surprise, perhaps approval, but he merely nodded and left. Marienne walked to the library with measured steps, trying to organize thoughts that insisted on scattering. She couldn't continue avoiding Torin, not when the wolves around them were getting bolder. She needed an ally, and he was the only one she trusted, even if that trust scared her more than any external threat. Torin arrived 15 minutes later, knocking on the door before entering. When his eyes met hers for the first time in nearly a week, Marienne felt the impact like a physical wave. He looked tired, deeper lines around his eyes, shadows beneath them that suggested sleepless nights. She probably looked the same. "You summoned me," he said, his voice neutral, professional, as if they were strangers, as if he hadn't kissed her until she forgot her own name. "Yes." Marienne gestured toward the chair in front of the desk, but he didn't sit. He just stood, waiting. "Balfour is pressing again. He wants access to the land records. And you will deny him." It was not a question. He knew her well enough to know the answer. "I will, but that means he will escalate." She crossed her arms, trying to maintain emotional distance. "He won't stop. None of them will. And Her voice wavered slightly. "I don't know how much longer I can sustain this alone." Torin took a step forward, instinctive, but stopped before coming too close. "You are not alone." "No." Marienne met his eyes, and there was a pain there that she no longer tried to hide. "Because the last few days, it has felt very much like I am." He closed his eyes briefly, his jaw tensing. "Marienne." "No," she interrupted, raising her hand. "I am not blaming you. You made the choice you thought was right. I understand, but don't pretend that nothing has changed between us, because it has, and pretending otherwise only makes everything harder." A heavy silence filled the library. Torin looked at her as if he were fighting an internal battle, and Marienne waited, her heart beating unevenly, not knowing which side of him would win. Finally he sighed, a weary, defeated sound. "You are right." He pulled out the chair and sat down, as if his legs could no longer bear the weight. "And I apologize for treating you as if we could simply forget." "I don't want to forget." Marienne sat down too, and now separated only by the desk, she allowed herself to be honest. "I just want to understand. Understand where we stand now." "I don't know." The admission came out difficult, but true. "All I know is that when I think of you in danger, something inside me goes mad. And when I think of touching you again..." He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I am torn between what I want and what is right." "What if what you want is right?" Torin looked at her for a long moment, and there was so much in his eyes: desire, fear, hope, resignation. "Then I am the luckiest and most doomed man in the world." Marienne wanted to cross the desk, touch his face, tell him they could find a way. But before she could, Torin straightened in his chair, his expression shifting to something more serious. "I need to tell you something." His voice was tense now, charged. "And you won't like it." The tone sent a cold feeling down Marienne's spine. "Say it." Torin took a deep breath as if preparing to jump off a cliff. "I was here the day your husband died." Marienne blinked, processing the words. "What?" "Laird MacRae sent me to discuss a trade agreement with Count Ruthven. I arrived before dawn, waited in the guards' quarters." He paused, his eyes fixed on hers. "And I saw a man leaving the Count's private chambers, hours before the fever was announced." Marienne's world tilted slightly. She grasped the edge of the desk, feeling dizzy. "A man?" she repeated, her voice weak. "What man?" I didn't recognize the face. He wore a hood, moved quickly, but he was carrying something. A small bag, perhaps vials. And the way he left... Torin leaned forward, urgency in every word. He was not a servant. Servants don't hide like that. He was fleeing. Marienne felt nausea rise. Her hands began to tremble, and she pressed them against the wooden surface to keep them steady. "Why did you never say anything?" Her voice came out rough, accusatory. "Why did you wait months?" Torin didn't look away, accepting her anger. Because I'm a bastard. A son with no name. There was bitterness in his voice now. My word against a lord's, against the official version of a sudden fever. I would be killed before there was a trial, or worse, dismissed as a liar trying to cause trouble. Marienne stood up abruptly, her chair scraping on the stone floor. She walked to the window, needing air, space, anything that wasn't the truth being dumped on her. So he was... She couldn't finish the sentence. Eliminated. Torin completed, his voice soft but firm. Yes, I believe he was. Marianne's legs felt weak, and she gripped the window frame. For 18 months she had lived with rumors, whispers, pitying glances disguised as curiosity, but she had always presumed they were just that, malicious, unfounded gossip. Now she had a witness, someone who had seen something. Real. Who? She turned to face him. Who would do that? Torin stood up, approaching slowly, as if afraid of frightening her. I don't know, but I have suspicions. He stopped a few steps from her. Balfour has wanted your lands for years. Alistair always thought he deserved more than he received. Reverend Wallace has connections with all the powerful lords in the region. Any of them would have a motive. Motive? Marienne repeated, her voice hollow. My husband was killed for greed. Probably. Torin hesitated, then carefully completed. And whoever did it is still free, waiting for the next move. And you, he paused meaningfully, you are the next move. Fear should have paralyzed her. But instead, Marienne felt something different grow in her chest. Not panic, cold, calculated fury, determination. She lifted her eyes, meeting his, and saw surprise when he read the expression on her face. Then let's find him. Her voice was firm now, without a tremor. Together. Torin studied her for a long moment, and there was genuine admiration in his eyes. This could cost you everything. If we start investigating, whoever it is will know, and they will react. It already cost me everything once. Marienne took a step forward, closing the distance between them further. I lost a husband. I lost my peace. I lost the illusion of safety. And now I discover that everything was based on a lie, on a crime that no one wanted to see. She took a deep breath. I am no longer afraid, Torin. I only have anger and purpose. Torin looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time, as if the elegant, controlled woman had transformed into a warrior before him. You are braver than any warrior I have ever known, he said, his voice low, laden with genuine reverence. Marienne felt warmth spread through her chest at the compliment, but forced herself to maintain focus. Then help me. Teach me what you know. We will unearth every secret, every lie until we find the truth. And when we find it, Torin asked, what will you do with it? I will destroy whoever destroyed me. The coldness in her own voice surprised Marienne, but did not scare her. And I will reclaim what is mine, starting with my life. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just stood there, looking at each other with a new understanding. They were no longer just protector and protected. They were no longer just two people fighting against a forbidden attraction. They were allies, partners, united by a purpose that transcended desire. And somehow this was more intimate than any kiss. They spent the following afternoon locked in the library, documents scattered across the large oak table. Torin brought his own notes, observations he had made discreetly about strange movements, overheard conversations, patterns that didn't make sense. Marienne brought financial records, the Count's correspondence, anything that might hold a clue. And together, they began to piece together a macabre puzzle. Here, Marienne pointed to an entry in the account books. 3 days before the Count's death, there is a large payment marked as medical services, but our local doctor did not receive that amount. Torin leaned in for a closer look, his shoulder brushing hers. Neither of them pulled back. So, who was the payment for? I don't know. There is no name. Just, she turned a few pages. Initials. TB. Thane. Balfour, Torin said immediately. Marienne looked at him, her eyes wide. You think he... Not alone. Balfour is many things, but he's a coward. He wouldn't do this without a guarantee that he wouldn't be caught. Torin picked up another document, frowning. But if he paid someone, a corrupt doctor perhaps, someone who knew how to make it look like a natural fever, Marienne completed, nausea returning. Someone who had access. They continued working, losing track of time. The sun went down, and Duncan brought candles, then tea, then informed them that dinner was ready. but neither of them wanted to stop. There was something almost cathartic about finally doing something, about not just surviving, but actively fighting. And doing it together created a connection that went beyond words. It was close to midnight when Marienne reached out to grab a document on the farthest pile. Her hand brushed Torin's, who was reaching for the same paper. Both froze. The touch was accidental, brief, but neither of them immediately withdrew their hand. They stayed like that, fingers lightly touching the old paper, looking at each other across the candlelit table. "Marienne," Torin began, his voice husky. "I know," she interrupted softly. "I know we can't. I know all the reasons why this is complicated, dangerous, potentially destructive. But," she turned her hand, intertwining her fingers with his, "but I would rather have you by my side as a partner, as an ally, than not have you at all." Torin squeezed her fingers, and there was so much contained in that simple gesture. A promise, protection, something dangerously close to devotion. "You have me," he said. "In all the ways that matter, you have me." Marienne smiled, the first genuine smile since the storm. "Then we proceed with faith in something greater than just the two of us. And with you," Torin completed, "that is already enough." They stayed like that for another moment, hands intertwined over documents that held deadly secrets, united by purpose and something deeper that neither dared to fully name. The war around them was real. Conspiracy, murder, powerful men wanting to destroy her. But the war within them was greater, and for the first time, Marienne dared to imagine that they could, at last, win both, as long as they didn't lose each other in the process. The following 2 weeks were of meticulous work. Marienne and Torin investigated every document, every record, every fragment of information that could connect the dots between the Count's death and the men circling her lands like vultures. They worked side by side, sometimes until late hours, talking in low voices about theories, possibilities, and missing evidence. And at some point in the process, the tension between them changed its nature. It didn't disappear, but transformed into something deeper, more sustainable. Mutual respect, absolute trust, a partnership that went beyond any physical attraction. But the desire was still there, pulsing low and constant, like embers beneath ashes. In the 3rd week of May, an invitation arrived for the annual village fair, a traditional event where merchants sold goods, musicians played in the squares, and nobles made expected public appearances. Marienne usually attended, maintaining a good relationship with the people who worked her lands. Duncan suggested that perhaps this year it would be prudent to avoid it. Torin immediately agreed, but Marienne refused. "If I start hiding, they win," she had said, cold determination in her amber-green eyes, "and I won't give them that satisfaction." Torin didn't like it, but he also didn't argue. He merely ensured that there would be extra precautions, more guards, checked routes, never leaving her alone. And as they prepared to leave on that sunny morning, he checked his weapons 3 times, his gaze distant and calculating, like a warrior anticipating danger. Marienne wore a simple but elegant outfit, a light blue linen dress with long sleeves and a modest neckline, her hair tied back in an elaborate braid, a light cloak over her shoulders. She wore no ostentatious jewelry, preferring an accessible appearance for the popular event. But when she descended the stairs and found Torin waiting in the courtyard, she saw something change in his expression. He watched her descend every step, his eyes tracing every line, every movement, and when she got close, he whispered just one word: "Beautiful." Marienne felt heat rise up her neck, but she smiled. "You don't look too bad yourself, MacRae." And he wasn't. Torin wore his full tartan, a clean white linen shirt, his hair tied back behind his head with a leather strip, completely revealing his angular face, his strong jaw. He looked exactly like what he was, a Highlander at the peak of his strength, living ancestry, a man who belonged to the mountains as much as the stones belonged. The journey to the village was quiet. The day was beautiful, the sun shining through scattered clouds, a gentle breeze bringing the scent of blooming heather. Marienne rode alongside Torin, and occasionally their glances met, silent conversations that needed no words. When they arrived at the village, the fair was already in full swing. Colorful stalls filled the central square, children ran between adults, musicians played, bagpipes and fiddles, and the air smelled of fresh bread, roasted meat, and local ale. People greeted Marienne with genuine respect, and she stopped to talk, listened to concerns, and promised to look into the issues raised. Torin always remained 2 steps behind her, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd, his hand never far from his sword. He did not relax, not for a second, and it was that vigilance that saved everything. Marienne was examining fabrics at a stall when she felt a change in the air. Torin had tensed completely, his body in a defensive position, his eyes fixed on something beyond the crowd. She turned, following his gaze, and saw Lord Thane Balfour crossing the square with 6 armed men. It was not a social visit. It was a display of force. Thane saw her and smiled, an expression that didn't reach his cold eyes. He advanced directly toward her, ignoring the curious glances of the villagers, and stopped too close to be polite. "Lady Ruthven, what a delightful surprise to find you here." "Lord Balfour." Marienne kept her voice neutral, but her body had instinctively positioned itself closer to Torin. "I didn't know you frequented popular fairs. I have varied interests." His eyes swept over her face, briefly descended to her modest neckline, then returned to meet her eyes with clear intention. "And some interests are particularly persistent." Torin took a step forward, placing himself partially between Marienne and Thane. "The lady is occupied. If you have business, arrange a formal meeting." Thane finally looked at Torin, and there was thinly veiled contempt in his expression. "The guard dog speaks now. Impressive." "The guard dog protects," Torin replied, his voice low and dangerous, "and bites when necessary." The tension exploded so fast that Marienne barely had time to process it. One of Thane's men, a large fellow with a scar across his face, advanced toward Torin, his hand on his sword hilt. But Torin reacted first, a movement so fluid it seemed rehearsed, disarming the man and forcing him to his knees before anyone could blink. The square fell silent. Musicians stopped playing. Conversations died. Everyone was looking at the unfolding confrontation. Thane smiled, but now there was something dangerous in that smile. Aggression against my men, MacRae? In front of witnesses. Defense against a threat. Torin released the man, who quickly backed away, clutching his sore wrist. "If you wanted to talk, you wouldn't have brought a small army." Marienne tried to intervene to calm the situation before it fully escalated. "Gentlemen, this is neither the place nor the time for—" But Thane interrupted her, taking an abrupt step forward and grabbing her arm with a force that made Marienne gasp in pain. "You are coming with me now, voluntarily or not." Everything happened simultaneously. Torin moved like lightning, but 3 of Thane's men intercepted him, forming a human barrier. Villagers screamed, beginning to back away, and Thane pulled Marienne against him, his arm wrapping around her waist in an embrace that was a prison, not affection, while his other hand held a small knife discreetly pressed against her ribs. "Don't make a scene, dear," he whispered in her ear, his voice icy, "or your Highlander will watch you suffer before he dies." Marienne felt the panic rising, but forced herself to breathe slowly, to keep her head clear. She couldn't scream, that would cause chaos. She couldn't fight, and the knife was too close to vital organs, but she could buy time. "You won't be able to leave the village with me," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "Everyone saw. You will be hunted. Not if I say you came willingly, that you finally accepted my protection." Thane began to retreat, dragging her, and his men kept Torin contained, 3 against 1, swords drawn but not attacking, just blocking. And then Marienne's eyes met Torin's across the growing distance. What she saw there frightened her more than the knife at her ribs. It was not the controlled warrior. It was not the disciplined protector. It was something primitive, feral, absolutely deadly. His blue eyes had darkened almost to black, his jaw so tense that muscles visibly jumped, his entire body vibrating with contained violence. He was no longer a man trying to do the right thing. He was a predator, seeing his mate being taken. And predators do not negotiate. Torin moved. What happened in the next few seconds seemed impossible for a single man. He deflected the first sword with a movement that looked like a dance, used the momentum to spin and disarm the second attacker, and then simply pushed past the third with brute force that threw the man to the ground. Free, Torin advanced directly toward Thane with a speed that made villagers scream and scatter. "Release her now!" Every word came out, separately, deadly. Thane laughed, but there was nervousness now. "Or what? You'll attack me? kill me in front of everyone? You're just a guard dog, MacRae, and dogs obey. I am the man who will rip off every one of those fingers if you don't release her in the next 3 seconds. There was no bluff in his voice, just a cold promise. Thane hesitated, the first real sign of fear, and in that hesitation, Marienne acted. She stomped hard on his foot, her elbow going for his ribs. Simultaneously, and when he stumbled, she threw herself to the side, away from the knife. Torin waited no longer. He closed the distance, grabbed Thane by the collar with one hand, and the blow he delivered with the other was so strong that it made Thane drop to his knees, groaning. The knife clattered onto the stone floor with a metallic sound. Torin forced him completely down, a knee on Thane's chest, and there was something terrifying in his expression, control slipping, revealing, a fury he always kept buried. You touched her. His voice was rough, unrecognizable. You threatened to harm the woman He didn't finish, but everyone understood. Marienne saw Torin's hands close around Thane's throat, saw the pressure increase, saw the moment he would let instinct completely win, and she could not allow it. Not because Thane deserved mercy, but because Torin deserved to keep his soul intact. "Torin," she said, her voice firm, cutting through the red haze around him. "Stop." He didn't seem to hear. Fingers tightened further. Marienne approached, placing her hand on his shoulder, a light but undeniable touch. "Torin, look at me." Slowly, as if it cost him everything, he lifted his eyes, and when they met hers, Marienne saw the man fighting the monster that violence created. "He is not worth your soul," she said softly, her hand moving to touch his face, forcing him to keep his focus on her. "You saved me. Now let me save you." For a terrifying moment, Marienne didn't know which side would win. But then Torin released his grip, pulling back sharply as if the touch burned him. Thane fell to the side, coughing, clutching his throat. But he was still laughing, a broken, maniacal laugh. "You two are fools," he spat, his voice hoarse. "Do you think you can win? That discovering a small secret changes anything?" He tried to get up, but Torin stopped him with a mere look. "The Reverend Alistair. We all wanted the lands. Your husband was too weak to keep them. And you, Lady Ruthven, you were always the prize, the reward for eliminating the obstacle." Absolute silence fell over the square. Even Thane's guards seemed shocked by the open confession. Torin grabbed Thane again, lifting him by the collar until they were face to face. "Was it you who killed him?" Thane smiled, a twisted, defeated smile. "I arranged it. I paid the corrupt doctor no one would question. But the poison..." He looked at Marienne, his eyes cold. "That was the Reverend's idea. He said it was God's will to remove obstacles to natural order. And Alistair, he forged documents, prepared legal challenges for when you inevitably failed to manage the lands alone." Thane spat at their feet. "It was perfect. Until your Highlander showed up and ruined everything." Marienne felt the world tilt again. Not because of the revelation, she had already suspected it, but because of the raw confirmation, the coldness with which he described her husband's murder as a simple business transaction. "You will pay for every lie." Her voice came out icy, charged with promise. "For every manipulation. I will ensure the entire world knows what you did." "With what proof?" Thane laughed, but he was bleeding now, his face bruised by Torin's blow. "My word against yours. A confession extorted under duress. It will never hold up." "Then it's a good thing we have witnesses." A new voice cut across the square. Duncan, who had appeared with 3 of the castle guards, all armed. 50 people heard every word you said, Lord Balfour, including your attempted kidnapping and confession of murder." The butler looked around, meeting familiar faces. "And all of them will testify when this is brought before Laird MacRae and the Crown authorities." Thane turned pale, finally grasping the magnitude of his mistake. He had confessed publicly, in front of villagers who loved Marienne, guards, loyal to her, and a Highlander warrior who now had a legitimate cause to arrest him. Torin signaled to the guards, "Arrest him, and send messengers to find Reverend Wallace and Alistair Ruthven. All will be judged." As they dragged Thane away, he shouted one last threat. "You will regret this, Marienne, all of you will." But his words were lost in the distance. When silence finally returned, Marienne felt her legs weaken. All the adrenaline, all the contained fear, all the strength that had sustained her composure, it all collapsed at once. Torin caught her before she fell, his arms wrapping around her with a firmness that was both protection and refuge. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. He just held her, one hand on the back of her head, the other firm on her back, and let her tremble against his chest. "You are safe," he whispered into the top of her head, his voice rough. "I won't let anyone touch you. Never again." Marienne believed him, because she felt the absolute truth in his words, in the way he held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When she finally managed to compose herself enough to speak, her voice came out muffled against his chest. "Take me home." Torin didn't hesitate. He lifted her into his arms, a movement so smooth she barely felt it, and began to walk back to where they had left the horses. Marienne didn't protest. She just rested her head against his. Shoulder closed her eyes and allowed herself, for the first time in a long time, to be completely cared for. Duncan organized everything: guards to escort the prisoners, messengers dispatched, witnesses recorded. And while that was happening, Torin carried Marienne through the village, settled her onto his horse and mounted behind her, keeping her enveloped in his arms for the entire journey back. She had never felt so safe and so scared of what it meant, because now, after everything she knew without a doubt, Torin MacRae was not just a protector, he was not just an ally, he was not just the man she desired, he was the man she loved, and that truth was more dangerous than any conspiracy. The 3 days following Lord Thane's arrest brought a deceptive calm to Ruthven Castle. Messengers came and went carrying news. Reverend Wallace had disappeared, likely fled to distant lands where his religious influence still protected him. Alistair Ruthven was last, seen near the English border, also in flight, and Thane, imprisoned in the MacRae clan dungeons, awaited a formal trial that would inevitably end in execution or permanent exile. Marienne should have felt victorious, avenged, free, but all she felt was a growing fear, because now, with the external enemies being eliminated, only the truth she had been avoiding remained. What was between her and Torin could no longer be ignored, and the more time they spent together, the more obvious it became to anyone with eyes. Duncan looked from one to the other during meals with a knowing expression. Servants whispered in the corridors, and although no one said anything openly, Marienne felt the weight of the glances, the speculations, the inevitable conclusion everyone would reach. Lady Ruthven and her Highlander protector, the widow and the warrior, the Countess and the bastard. The scandal would be devastating. On the morning of the 4th day, Marienne woke up with a decision formed during a sleepless night. She could not continue like this. She could not allow Torin to stay and sacrifice himself for something society would never accept. He deserved more than to be a widow's secret lover, hidden in the shadows, risking everything for scraps of stolen affection. He deserved freedom, a life of his own, a woman who could proclaim him publicly without destroying him in the process, and she needed to set him free, even if it killed her inside. Marienne found him in the courtyard, supervising the training of 2 young guards. The morning sun illuminated his profile, highlighting the strength of his jaw, the concentration in his blue eyes, as he corrected one of the young men's posture. He wore only leather breeches and a linen shirt with sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing muscular forearms marked by small, ancient scars. A map of battles survived. Marienne forced herself to memorize every detail, because soon it would only be a memory. When Torin saw her, something in his face softened immediately. He dismissed the guards with a brief nod and walked towards her, and Marienne needed all her strength not to retreat from the tenderness in his gaze. "Good morning." His voice was low, intimate, as if speaking only for her, even in a crowded square. "I need to speak with you." Marienne kept her voice neutral, formal. "In the library. Now." Something in her tone made him hesitate, but he nodded and followed her through the silent corridors. When they entered the library and Marienne closed the door, the sound echoed with terrible finality. Torin waited, standing near the window, the rising sun creating a golden halo around him. He was so handsome it hurt to look, so good that she couldn't bear what she was about to do, but she had to. "You need to leave, Torin." The words came out quickly, before she lost her courage. "Before it's too late." The silence that followed was dense, suffocating. Torin didn't move, but something in his eyes shifted, a painful understanding of what she was doing. "Too late for what?" His voice was controlled, careful. "For you, for your life, for everything you can still have if you don't get trapped here." Marienne crossed her arms, trying to maintain physical distance since the emotional one was shattering. The enemies have been defeated. The threat is over. You fulfilled your duty. You can return to the MacRae clan with your honor intact. So with my honor intact, Torin repeated the words as if testing the bitter taste. Is that what you think matters to me? It should matter, because it's all you have. No. He took a step forward, and there was raw pain in his voice now. It's not everything. Not anymore. Marienne closed her eyes, trying to gather the strength to continue. People are talking, Torin, whispering, and soon it won't just be whispers. It will be open accusations. And when that happens, her voice failed. When that happens, I will lose everything. My lands, my position, my freedom, and you will lose your life. Then let them talk. Torin took another step, closing the distance between them. Let them judge. I don't care. But I care. Marienne opened her eyes, tears threatening to fall. I care because you matter, and I won't let you sacrifice everything for something that has no future. Torin stopped an arm's length away, looking at her with air-stealing intensity. Do you think I haven't thought about this? That I haven't spent entire nights weighing every consequence, every risk? His voice was rough now. But the truth, Marienne, is that it's already too late. For me, it always was. Don't say that. Why? Because it makes it harder to send me away. He laughed humorlessly. Marienne, I'm dying inside every second I spend away from you. Do you think leaving will save me? It will only change where I suffer. The tears fell now, and Marienne no longer had the strength to stop them. Don't make this harder than it already is. Torin raised his hand as if to touch her face, but stopped halfway, his fingers trembling slightly in the air between them. Hard? You want to know what's hard? His voice broke. It's waking up every day knowing the woman I love is meters away, but might as well be worlds away, because I have no right to claim her. It's watching her smile at others, and knowing I can never be the reason for that smile. In public, it's accidentally touching her hand and feeling electricity run through my entire body, but having to pretend indifference. He finally lowered his hand, defeat crossing his face. That is hard, Marienne. Leaving would just be emptiness. Marienne covered her face with her hands, silent sobs shaking her shoulders, because he was right. All of it was true, and sending him away wouldn't solve anything except ensuring they both suffered separately instead of together. But she couldn't find an alternative. She couldn't see a path where they both survived whole. It will keep you alive, she whispered between her fingers, and that's all that matters. Not to me, Torin said with absolute conviction. Not if living means being without you. Before Marienne could reply, before she could find the words to express the pain tearing her apart, a sharp alarm bell sound cut through the air. Both froze. The bell only rang for emergencies. Invasion, fire, immediate danger. Torin was at the door before Marienne could process it, yanking it open. Thick smoke filled the corridor, and the acrid smell of burning wood pervaded everything. Fire. He turned to her, his face instantly transformed from vulnerable man to warrior in action. Stay behind me. They ran through the corridors, following the sound of screams and the growing orange glow. When they reached the great hall, they found chaos. Servants running with buckets of water, guards trying to contain flames consuming the old tapestries on the walls, thick smoke obscuring everything. Duncan appeared through the smoke, his face smudged with ash. Milady, it was deliberate. Someone set fire in multiple places simultaneously. We found this. He held out a piece of torn cloth with a Ruthven crest embroidered on it. It's from Alistair's cloak. Marienne felt cold anger replace panic. He had returned. In a final, desperate attempt to destroy what he couldn't possess, Torin was already moving, organizing guards, directing efforts to contain the flames before they spread to the residential wings. And Marienne joined the effort, grabbing buckets, helping frightened servants evacuate, refusing to be a spectator to the destruction of her home. It took 3 hours to completely control the fire. When the last flames were finally extinguished, the great hall was in ruins. Blackened walls, destroyed tapestries, furniture reduced to ashes. But the structure remained, and no one had died. Marienne sat on the cold stone floor of the courtyard, covered in ash and soot, trembling with exhaustion and fading adrenaline. She had fought alongside the servants, refusing to back down, and now her body exacted the price. That was how Torin found her, alone, trembling, staring blankly at her own blackened hands, as if she didn't recognize them. He knelt in front of her, his own face smudged with soot, his clothes torn and dirty. But his eyes were clear, focused only on her. "Marienne," he said softly, "look at me." She lifted her eyes slowly, and what he saw there destroyed him. Not just weariness, but defeat, as if she had finally reached the limit of how much one person could endure. Enough. Torin held her face with both hands, forcing her to focus on him. Enough of running, enough of trying to be strong alone, enough of sending me away to protect me. Torin. No, he interrupted, his thumbs tracing the lines of clean tears through the soot on her face. I am not leaving. I don't care what they say. I don't care if they judge us. I don't care if I lose everything, because without you, I have nothing worth keeping. You don't understand. Marienne tried to look away, but he wouldn't allow it. If you stay, if we continue, you could die, Torin completed. Then so be it. I would rather die loving you than live an entire life without you. Don't say that, she finally reacted, her hands grasping his wrists. Your life matters. You matter. Then stop trying to push me away. He leaned in closer, their foreheads nearly touching. Because I swear by all that I am, all that I have been, and all that I will be, I will fight for you until my last breath. I will face lords, kings, anyone who stands in our way, with God's help if necessary. But I will not give up on you. I will not lose you out of fear. Marienne closed her eyes, feeling her last defenses completely crumble. What if we lose everything? Her voice came out trembling, vulnerable. Torin pressed his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling. Then we lose together. But as long as we have each other, we lose nothing that truly matters. And it was that absolute certainty in his voice, that unwavering conviction, that finally broke Marienne's last bit of resistance. Because he was right. Living without him was not protection. It was just another form of death. She opened her eyes, meeting his so close she could see every golden fleck in the deep blue, and said the words she had been denying for weeks. I love you, Torin MacRae. Her voice trembled, but the words came out clear, true. And I'm tired of lying about it. Tired of pretending I can live without you. Tired of being afraid. Torin closed his eyes, and when he reopened them, there were tears there. The first time she had ever seen him cry. Say it again. His voice was hoarse, broken. Please. Marienne smiled through her own tears, touching his face with trembling hands. I love you. I love your stupid honor that almost separated us. I love your silence that says more than words. I love how you look at me as if I were the most precious thing in the world. I love... Her voice failed, but she continued. I love you. All of you. Torin waited no longer. He kissed her like a man finding water after days in the desert. Urgent, yet reverent. Hungry, yet gentle. His hands cupped her face, tilting her to deepen the kiss, and Marienne responded with equal intensity, her fingers sinking into his hair, pulling him closer. There was no more hesitation. There was no more fear of consequences. There was only the raw truth between them. A love that had survived conspiracy, violence, social pressure, and their own efforts to deny it. When they finally separated, both gasping, Torin kept her wrapped in his arms, refusing to let go. And there, sitting on the cold stone floor of the courtyard, covered in the ashes of the still smoldering ruins, surrounded by the wreckage of what almost destroyed them, they finally allowed themselves just to be vulnerable, to be honest, to be irrevocably, undeniably in love. Duncan eventually appeared, discreet as ever, and informed them that Laird MacRae had sent a messenger requesting the presence of both of them the following day. There were matters to be discussed. Thane's trial, the disappearance of Wallace and Alistair, and probably Torin's future on the Ruthven lands. But at that moment, neither of them cared. Because the world around them could be crumbling. It could be conspiring against them. It could judge them, condemn them, try to separate them. But there in each other's arms they were unbreakable. And for the first time in a long time, both believed that perhaps love was enough to conquer everything, even when all seemed lost. Especially when all seemed lost. The journey to the MacRae clan lands took 2 full days of riding through the Highlands. Marienne and Torin left at dawn the day after the fire, accompanied by Duncan and 4 loyal guards. The sky was heavy with grey clouds threatening rain, but not a drop fell, as if even the weather was waiting to see the outcome of this story. They rode side by side, and for the first time there was no hesitation in the glances exchanged. No more pretense. Their hands occasionally touched when the horses drew close on the narrow trails, and neither of them retreated. It was a silent but clear declaration. They were together, and they would no longer hide it. Duncan observed everything with a serene expression bordering on approval, but he didn't comment. He just ensured that the company maintained a proper pace and that Marienne was comfortable during the rest stops. On the second night, they camped in a sheltered clearing, the fire crackling low to avoid attracting unwanted attention. Marienne sat near the flames, her traveling cloak wrapped around her shoulders, watching Torin check the perimeter one last time before allowing himself to relax. When he finally joined her, sitting so close that their shoulders touched, she rested her head against him naturally, and Torin put his arm around her, pulling her closer, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly, his voice just for her. "Terrified," Marienne admitted with raw honesty. "But not of facing the council. I'm afraid they'll take you from me." Torin kissed the top of her head, a gesture so simple yet loaded with promise. "They would have to kill me first, and even then, I would return as a ghost to haunt them until they agreed." Marienne laughed softly, a sound she hadn't made in days, and Torin felt something warm in his chest. He had spent his entire life believing he didn't deserve moments like this. Simple, tenderness, shared laughter, the warmth of another person choosing to be near him not out of duty, but out of genuine desire. "Torin?" Marienne raised her face to look at him, the firelight dancing in her amber-green eyes. "Yes? No matter what happens tomorrow, thank you for making me feel alive again." He held her face delicately, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "You did the same for me. For the first time, I'm not just the bastard, or just the warrior. I am a man, whole, because you see me that way." They kissed there under the stars of the Highlands, with discreet witnesses keeping a respectful distance, and there was no haste, no desperate urgency, just a deep connection between two souls that finally allowed themselves to belong to each other. The next morning, they arrived at the MacRae territory. The clan's castle rose against the mountains like a natural extension of the rock, ancient stones covered in moss and history. Banners with the MacRae crest, a black boar on a red background, fluttered in the strong wind, and Highlander warriors patrolled the walls with sharp eyes. When Marienne's company was announced, the gates opened, revealing a wide courtyard where men trained, women carried supplies, and children ran among adults in a chaotic but functional choreography of clan life. Laird Ewan MacRae awaited them in the great hall. A man in his 50s, grey-haired, his shoulders still broad despite his age, and penetrating blue eyes that seemed to see through lies, he was known for strict but fair justice, and everyone who knew him knew he did not tolerate dishonor. "Torin," the laird nodded briefly when they entered. "Lady Ruthven, welcome." Torin bowed his head respectfully, and Marienne made an appropriate curtsy, but there was a tension in the air that no one pretended to ignore. "Laird MacRae," Torin spoke first, his voice firm. "I bring evidence of conspiracy, murder, and attempted illegal land seizure, and I request a formal clan judgment. I received the messengers. I read the reports." The laird gestured to the table where documents were spread out. "I also received other information about the nature of your presence on the Ruthven lands." The silence that followed was heavy. Marienne felt her stomach clench but maintained a serene expression. Beside her, Torin remained motionless, but she felt the tension radiating from him. "The council will be convened at dusk," the laird continued, looking directly at Torin, "and you will answer not only for the conspiracy, but for your conduct as the designated protector." Torin did not back down. "I understand, Laird. I hope so." Ewan MacRae looked from Torin to Marienne, his expression impossible to decipher. "Because the clan's honor is at stake, and I do not compromise it, for anyone." The hours until the council were the longest of Marienne's life. She was accommodated in comfortable quarters, but she couldn't sit still. She paced back and forth, rehearsing words, preparing arguments, trying to anticipate every accusation they might make. Duncan found her near nightfall, bringing tea she didn't drink. "Milady," he said softly, "may I speak freely?" "Always, Duncan. What you are about to do, publicly defending your love for a man whom society deems unsuitable, will change everything. Some will say you are mad, others that you are dishonored, and you will never be seen the same way again. Marienne looked at the butler who had served her faithfully for years and smiled, a small, sad but true smile. I know, but do you know what I discovered, Duncan? That a reputation built on lies and appearances is worth nothing, and that a life without true love is just existence. I have existed long enough. It's time to live. Duncan nodded slowly, and for the first time in years of formal service, he smiled. Then go and fight for it, milady, and know that no matter what they decide, you have my respect and my loyalty. When the bell announced the summoning of the council, Marienne was not invited to attend. Only Torin was called. After all, he was the one being judged. But as he walked towards the great hall, she followed him to the door, briefly holding his hand. No matter what they say, she whispered, no matter how they judge me, you are the most honorable man I have ever known, and nothing they decide changes that. Torin turned completely to her, and there in front of passing guards and servants he kissed her, not lingeringly, but with an intensity that made the nature of what they felt clear. When he pulled away, there was steely determination in his blue eyes. Wait for me. I will return, and when I return it will be as your future or as a ghost, but I will return. Then he entered the hall, and the heavy doors closed behind him. Marienne was escorted back to her quarters, but she couldn't stay there. She needed to know, she needed to hear. So when the guard accompanying her was momentarily distracted, she slipped out through the side corridors, finding a servant's passage that led to the back of the great hall. There, hidden behind an old tapestry, she could hear everything. The council consisted of 12 men, clan elders, respected warriors, the laird himself. Torin stood in the center, alone, but his posture was that of a warrior facing a battle, not a criminal awaiting sentence. Torin MacRae. The laird's voice echoed through the hall. You were designated to protect Lady Ruthven from threats to her lands and life, and by the reports, you fulfilled that duty with distinction. You dismantled a conspiracy, saved her from multiple attacks, brought evidence that will ensure justice. Yes, Laird, but there is a separate accusation. Rumors, brought by sources we cannot ignore, that you overstepped the bounds of your duty, that there was improper involvement. A dense silence filled the hall. Marienne clutched the edge of the tapestry tightly, her heart pounding unevenly. So I ask you directly, before this council and before God, did you dishonor Lady Ruthven? Are you lovers? Torin did not hesitate. His voice came out clear, firm, without a trace of shame. No, Laird. I protected her. I saved her. And yes, I loved her. But I never took from her what was not freely given. I never used my position to coerce her. I never put her in a situation where she could not refuse. Murmurs ran through the council. The Laird raised his hand, silencing them. Love between a protector and a protected is a betrayal of trust. You were sent to guard her, not to court her. Torin took a step forward, and now there was fire in his voice. Then judge me for it. His voice echoed off the stone walls. But not for dishonor, because if loving a brave, intelligent, worthy woman, a woman who faces corrupt lords with the same bravery as any warrior faces battle, who governs her lands with justice, who risks everything to find the truth, if loving that woman is betrayal, then yes, I betrayed, and I would do it again, without hesitation. The silence that followed was absolute, and it was at that moment that Marienne could no longer remain hidden. She pushed the tapestry aside and entered the hall, ignoring the guards' shouts of protest, walking directly to the center where Torin stood. The main doors were still closing behind her when her voice cut through the chaos. I did not allow him to speak alone for me while I am alive, and I will not start now. Everyone turned to her. Laird MacRae stood up, genuine surprise crossing his usually impassive face. Lady Ruthven, this is a closed council. You have no right. I have no right, Marienne interrupted, and there was power in her voice now. The authority of a woman who had governed lands, faced conspiracies, survived when others wanted her dead. You are judging the man I love based on rumors about my honor, about my choices, but I have no right to speak. She turned to face the entire council, her chin held high, her eyes defiant. Torin MacRae did not dishonor me. He saved me, not just from men who wanted to see me dead, but from a life without purpose, without passion, without hope. He saw me, not as a prize to be won, not as property to be managed, but as a person, as an equal. Her voice trembled slightly, but not from fear, from raw emotion. And if this council chooses to punish him for loving me when no one else dared, for respecting me when others only wanted to use me, then punish me too, because I choose him, here, now, before all of you and before God. The silence that followed her declaration was so dense that the crackling of the torches seemed thunderous. Laird MacRae studied her for a long moment, his expression impossible to read. Then, surprisingly, something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "You have the sharp tongue of a MacRae, Lady Ruthven." Marienne met his eyes without flinching. "Then make me one." Murmurs exploded in the council, half shocked, half admiring. But the Laird raised his hand again, silencing everyone. He looked from Marienne to Torin, who had turned completely to face her, something indescribable shining in his blue eyes. "Torin MacRae," the Laird spoke, slowly, weighing every word. "Do you desire her as your wife? With all that implies responsibility for her lands, a formal union of properties, permanent protection, not just as a warrior, but as a husband." Torin crossed the distance to Marienne, and there, before the entire council, he knelt. He took her hand with both of his, looking up with an air-stealing devotion. "More than breathing," his voice was rough, charged. "More than honor, more than life. I desire her as my wife, as my partner, as the reason I wake up every day. And I swear before this council that I will honor, protect, and love her until my last breath." Tears were streaming down Marienne's face now, but she was smiling. The first true, complete, unreserved smile. Laird MacRae struck his staff on the ground, the sound echoing with finality. "Then let it be. An honorable marriage will be performed within 3 days, allowing time for proper preparations. A union of the Ruthven lands with the permanent protection of the MacRae clan. And let the conspirators, Lord Thane Balfour, Reverend Wallace, and Alistair Ruthven, be judged by the Crown for murder, attempted fraud, and conspiracy against a noble family." He paused, looking around the council. "Does anyone object?" Silence. No one dared. "Then it is decided." Torin didn't wait for permission. He stood up and pulled Marienne into his arms, kissing her right there, in front of the Laird, the council, the guards. And this time there was nothing hidden, nothing shameful. Only love openly proclaimed, finally free from shadows. When they separated, both breathless, Marienne touched his face with reverence. "We did it," she whispered, still not fully believing it. "No," Torin corrected, a slow smile curving his lips. "You did it. You walked into a hall of Highlander warriors and defied them to disagree with you. That was impressive, doesn't describe it." Marienne laughed, a sound light as a bell, and rested her forehead against his. "I learned from the best. He was hers, and she was his, and the whole world had just witnessed it. There was no going back. There was no doubt. Only a path ahead, together. And for the first time since everything began, both breathed fully, free, chosen, loved. The judgment they feared had become liberation, and the sentence they expected had become a blessing. The Highlands witnessed many stories of impossible love, but this one, of the widow and the warrior, the Countess and the bastard, the woman who refused to be property, and the man who refused to be just a shadow, this story would be told for generations, because it proved something fundamental, that true love doesn't ask permission, it simply exists. And when two souls brave enough to claim it find each other, neither society nor tradition nor fear can stop them. They simply win, together. The 3 days of preparation passed in a blur of frantic activity. The MacRae clan transformed into an anthill of imminent celebration. Women sewing, men organizing the great hall, children running with wildflowers gathered from the hills, musicians tuning instruments. It was the wedding not just of 2 people, but a union of lands, a symbol of victory over a conspiracy that almost destroyed everything. Marienne barely saw Torin during those days. Tradition dictated that the groom and bride remain separated until the ceremony, but at night she found small flowers left on her doorstep, and she knew he was thinking of her. And in the morning, when she opened the curtains, sometimes she saw him training in the courtyard, and the way he briefly glanced at her window told her he was looking for her too. On the morning of the wedding, Marienne woke up with butterflies in her stomach, not from fear, but from vibrant anticipation. For the first time in her life, she was about to marry by her own choice, not for a political arrangement, not for social necessity, but because she loved and was loved in return. The women of the clan came to help her prepare, bringing a dress the laird had specially commissioned, emerald green silk that flowed like water, delicate embroidery in gold threads on the sleeves, and modest neckline. The color made her eyes sparkle like polished jewels, and when they placed intertwined white flowers in her loose hair, Marienne barely recognized the woman in the reflection. She was no longer the controlled, rigid widow protected by invisible armor. She was a woman about to start a new life, and for the first time this did not scare her. It excited her. Duncan arrived shortly before the ceremony, wearing his best clothes, his eyes slightly moist when he saw her. "Milady," he said softly, "may I say I have never seen you so radiant?" Marienne smiled, holding his hands briefly. "Thank you, Duncan, for everything, for standing by me when others would have fled, for never judging me, for just being there. It is an honor to serve someone worthy of service," he replied, his voice formal but his eyes betraying emotion. "And Lady Ruthven, or should I say Lady MacRae soon, know that my loyalty remains, always." Before she descended to the hall, one of the older women of the clan, a white-haired lady with astute eyes, approached, holding a small object wrapped in linen. "For you, lass," she said, placing the package in Marienne's hands. "MacRae, tradition. All brides receive it." Marienne carefully unwrapped it and found an ancient silver brooch, a stylized boar, the clan's symbol, delicately crafted. "It belonged to the laird's mother," the woman explained. "She said it should go to the bride who won not only a MacRae warrior's heart, but the clan's respect. You have won both." Tears stung Marienne's eyes, but she blinked to hold them back. She pinned the brooch to her dress, over her heart, and thanked the woman with a choked voice. When she finally descended the stairs toward the great hall, the sound of bagpipes filled the air, an ancient melody, simultaneously melancholic and triumphant. The double doors opened, revealing a transformed hall. Torches illuminated every corner, wildflowers decorated the stone pillars, and the entire clan was gathered. Warriors standing on the sides, families seated on makeshift benches, all wearing their best tartans. It was a sea of colors, reds, greens, blues, all the unique patterns of different MacRae lineages, and in the center, waiting near the large decorated fireplace, stood Torin. Marienne stopped at the threshold, her breath caught, just looking. He wore the full tartan with a pride that transcended mere clothing. It was a statement of identity, a heritage finally claimed. The woolen kilt fell perfectly from his hips, fastened by a worked leather belt, from which hung a small ceremonial sword. Over his shoulders, an additional plaid of the same tartan was fastened with a silver brooch. A white linen shirt, impeccably clean, contrasted with his sun-tanned skin. Dark hair was pulled back behind his head, completely revealing his angular face, strong jaw, and the blue eyes that now met hers across the distance. And the expression in those eyes completely stole the air from her lungs. It wasn't just desire, it was reverence, as if he were seeing something sacred, miraculous, impossible to believe was real. Marienne started to walk, and every step resonated in the respectful silence of the clan. When she reached his side, Torin extended his hand, a simple gesture yet loaded with meaning. She placed her hand in his, and their fingers intertwined with a familiarity born of all the times they had held each other in secret. But this time, there was no secret, only truth. Laird MacRae conducted the ceremony personally, his grave voice filling the hall as he recited ancient words in Gaelic, then translating so all would understand. He spoke of honor, loyalty, a commitment that transcended convenience and entered the soul. And then, the moment for the vows arrived. Torin turned completely to Marienne, holding both her hands, and when he spoke, his voice was firm, clear, without a trace of hesitation. "Marienne Ruthven," he began, and the mere way he said her name already carried devotion. "I swear to protect not only your body, but your heart, not only your life, but your dreams. I swear to be the man you deserve, not perfect, for I am not, but honest always. I swear to lift you when you fall, to fight when you tire, and to stand by your side when the whole world tries to tear us apart." His voice grew husky. "I swear to love you every day in every way I know how until my last breath. And if there is life beyond this, I swear to find you and love you again." Tears streamed freely down Marienne's face now, but she was smiling. She squeezed his hands, took a deep breath and said the vows she had practiced, but which came from the heart. "Torin MacRae." Her voice trembled, but not from fear, from pure emotion. "I swear to trust not only your strength, but your kindness. I swear to see not just the warrior, but the man, the one who reads philosophy by candlelight, who leaves flowers as silent promises, who chose honor even when it cost him everything." She paused, meeting his eyes. "I swear to love you not in spite of who you are, but exactly because of it, for your courage, your loyalty, your refusal to be less than you deserve to be. I swear to walk by your side as not behind, not ahead, but beside, facing whatever comes, because with you, I discovered that I am not just surviving, I am living." The silence that followed was so deep that the crackling of the fire seemed like thunder, and then the laird smiled, the first genuine smile many had seen on him in years. "By the power vested in me as laird of the MacRae clan and under the witness of God and this clan, I declare you husband and wife." He paused dramatically. "And let no one dare to separate what has been joined here." Torin waited for no further instruction. He pulled Marienne into his arms and kissed her right there in front of the laird, the council, the guards. And this time there was nothing hidden, nothing shameful, just love openly proclaimed, finally free from shadows. When they parted, both breathless, the laird declared, "I present to you Torin and Marienne MacRae." The celebration that followed was legendary. Tables were set up in the great hall and the outer courtyard, laden with food, roasted venison, fresh breads, aged cheeses, fruit tarts. Barrels of ale and mead flowed freely. Musicians played without stopping, bagpipes, fiddles, drums creating rhythms that made even the oldest stomp their feet. Torin and Marienne were dragged into traditional dances, spun by different partners, separated and reunited repeatedly by the complex choreography. But always, their eyes met across the crowd. They always returned to each other like irresistible magnets. At midnight, when the party was at its peak, Torin finally pulled her discreetly out of the hall. No one noticed, or pretended not to notice, when the newly married couple disappeared up the side stairs. The quarters prepared for them were in the East Tower, a spacious room with windows overlooking the mountains. Someone, probably the women of the clan, had decorated it with fresh flowers, lit candles created a soft golden light, and a fireplace crackled low, warming the room against the cold Highland night. When the door closed behind them, the sound of the party became distant, muffled, and for the first time since they woke up, they were truly alone. Torin leaned against the closed door, just looking at her. The candlelight danced over Marienne's face, highlighting every curve, every shadow. She was radiant, her hair slightly disheveled from the dances, her cheeks flushed from the celebration, her eyes shining with a happiness he had never seen before. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice husky. Even now, even married, he needed to hear it. Marienne walked towards him slowly, every step deliberate, and stopped so close she could feel his heat. "For the first time in my life," she touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with reverence. "I am, absolutely." Something inside Torin broke. The last barrier, the last remnant of restraint. He lifted her into his arms in a fluid motion. She let out a surprised laugh, and he carried her to the bed, setting her down with a care that contrasted with his evident urgency. He knelt beside the bed, looking at her with an intensity that made Marienne's skin tingle. "I have waited so long for you," he whispered, his hands tracing the outline of her dress, feeling her. Breath quickened beneath his fingers. "I dreamed of this moment so many times that I feared it wouldn't be real." Marienne sat up, bringing herself to his eye level, and began to unfasten the brooch that secured his tartan. "Then wait no more," she said softly, her fingers working the clasps with care. "We are here, together, and no one can take this from us." The tartan fell, pooling around his knees. Marienne unbuttoned his linen shirt slowly, revealing his broad chest, the muscles, defined by years of training, the ancient scars that mapped a history of survival. She traced each mark with light fingers, memorizing, honoring. Torin closed his eyes, his breathing growing ragged under her touches. No one had ever touched him like this, with tenderness, appreciation, as if he were something precious instead of just useful. "Marienne," his voice was rough with emotion, "I want all of you. Your mind, which challenges and fascinates me. Your heart, which is braver than any warrior. Your body—" He opened his eyes, meeting hers. "Everything, I want everything." She smiled, slow and full of promise. "Then take it, because you already have it." Torin stood up, pulling her with him, and slowly began to undo the fastenings of the emerald green dress. Every movement was deliberate, reverent, as if he were unwrapping a sacred gift. The dress slipped from her shoulders, falling in waves of silk around her feet. They stood like that for a suspended moment, just looking at each other in the golden candlelight, truly seeing for the first time without barriers, without fear, without anything except raw, honest love between them. And then Torin kissed her, not with desperate urgency, but with devotion that stole the air. His hands traced every curve, memorizing her shape, the temperature of her skin, the small sounds she made when he touched certain places, and Marienne responded with equal reverence, discovering the spots where her touches made his muscles contract, where her kisses made his breathing hitch. Hours were lost in deep kisses, intertwined breaths, words whispered in the dark that were promises and confessions and vows deeper than those spoken publicly. Afterwards, when their heartbeats finally calmed and their breathing returned to normal, they lay intertwined beneath the covers, his body wrapping hers as both protection and refuge. Torin kissed her shoulder softly, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her arm. "I never knew I could feel this way," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. Marienne turned to face him, her fingers tracing the scars on his chest, marks of ancient battles that she now knew intimately. "How?" she asked, though she thought she knew. Torin captured her hand, pressing it against where his heart beat strong and steady, whole, as if all the parts of me that were scattered, lost, finally found a place. As if, he struggled for words, as if I had spent my entire life being only half of something, and you were the other half that I didn't even know was missing. Tears stung Marienne's eyes, but they were tears of pure happiness. "I know," she whispered, "because I feel the same way. I spent so long building walls, protecting myself, trying to be strong alone, and then you appeared and showed me that true strength is not being alone. It is having the courage to let someone in." They kissed again, slow and deep, with no urgency now, just connection, and when they finally separated, Marienne nestled against his chest, listening to the steady heartbeat that had already become her favorite sound. The candles went out one by one, soft darkness enveloping the room. Outside, the clan's party continued, but here, in this room, there was only peace. Peace won through struggle, built on honesty, cemented with a love that had refused to be denied. Torin pulled the covers over both of them, his arms wrapping Marienne protectively even in sleep, and she smiled against his chest, feeling safer, more loved, more herself than ever before. They had gone through conspiracy, attempted murder, social prejudice, fear, and doubt. They had faced corrupt lords, a clan judgment, malicious speculation, and their own deep insecurities. And on the other side of all of it, they found not only each other, but better versions of themselves. Torin was no longer just a nameless warrior, a bastard with no place. He was a husband, a chosen protector, a man with a home and a future, and Marienne was no longer a widow controlled by circumstances, property to be negotiated. She was a woman who chose her own path, who fought for her own love, who proved that courage comes in many forms. When dawn finally began to paint the sky pink and gold, sending soft rays through the window, it found them still intertwined. Torin woke first by the instinct of a warrior who never slept deeply, but this time, instead of immediately getting up to check the perimeter, he just lay there, watching Marienne sleep. Her hair spread out on the pillow, her face serene, one hand resting over his heart even in sleep. As if even unconsciously she sought connection. He delicately traced the line of her face, marveling that this was real, that she was his, that they had won. Marienne stirred, her eyes opening slowly, and when they focused on him, she smiled, a lazy, happy, unreserved smile. "Good morning, husband," she said, testing the word, liking the sound. "Good morning, wife," Torin replied, his own smile curving his lips. They stayed like that for an eternal moment, just looking at each other in the soft morning light, before the world fully woke up and demanded attention. Just two people who had found something rare and precious, and who would protect it with everything they had. Because true love was not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about choosing the same person every day. It was about building a life together, stone by stone. It was about seeing the worst in each other and choosing to stay anyway. And as the light of dawn filled the room, bathing them in the promise of a new day, Torin and Marienne MacRae knew with absolute certainty that they had found exactly that. Forever started now, and they couldn't be more ready. A year had passed since the wedding that united, not just two people, but two lives that seemed destined to remain separate. And in that year, the Ruthven lands, now officially joined with the MacRae clan, had flourished in ways no one expected. The conspiracy was completely dismantled. Documents, the doctor's testimonies, intercepted letters, evidence gathered by Marienne and Torin. A hearing convened before the royal prosecutor brought confessions and witnesses. Lord Thane Balfour was denounced and, after trial, exiled and stripped of his possessions. Reverend Wallace was never found, presumably hidden in some distant monastery where his corrupt influence could not reach. And Alastair Ruthven, captured attempting to cross the border into England, served a sentence in prison before being banished with nothing but the clothes on his back. Justice had been severe, but fair, and with the enemies eliminated, Marienne and Torin could finally focus on what truly mattered, building a life together. The June morning was radiant, the sky a cloudless blue, a gentle breeze bringing the scent of flowering heather from the hills. Marienne woke up alone in the large bed they now shared in Ruthven Castle, rebuilt after the fire, stronger and more beautiful than before. Torin always woke early, a warrior's habit that years of relative peace could not break. She rose slowly, one hand instinctively going to the belly that now carried an undeniable curve. 7 months. In 2 months, she and Torin would meet the child growing inside her, and whenever she thought of it, something warm and wonderful expanded in her chest. She dressed carefully, a simple light blue linen dress, comfortable for her growing belly, her hair tied in a loose braid. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman completely transformed from the one who, little more than a year ago, was trapped in a joyless life, surrounded by enemies, believing she would never know true love. Now, she saw a woman loved, protected, happy, and the difference was visible in every line of her face, every movement of her body. She descended the stairs with careful steps. Torin insisted she shouldn't exert herself too much, a constant and adorable concern that made her laugh. When she reached the courtyard, she found exactly what she expected. Torin was in the center of the open space, surrounded by 5 young lads between 14 and 17, sons of clan families he had begun to train. He wore the MacRae tartan with a pride that had never diminished, only grown with time. The cool morning made the wool fabric sway gently as he demonstrated a blocking technique, his movements fluid and controlled. "It's not about brute strength," his voice carried through the quiet morning. "It's about reading your opponent, anticipating, moving with purpose, not just reacting." The lads watched with reverent attention. Torin had become more than just the protector of the Ruthven lands. He was a respected leader, a mentor, a living example that a man could be simultaneously a warrior and gentle, strong and honorable. Marienne stopped in the shadow of the castle entrance, just watching. One hand rested on her belly, feeling the occasional kicks of the baby, movements that always filled her with wonder, and she smiled, her heart so full it almost hurt. As if feeling the weight of her gaze even across the distance, Torin stopped mid-demonstration. He turned, his eyes searching and finding her immediately. And when their eyes connected, that slow smile, the one that was only hers, the one that still made her heart race, curved his lips. He said something to the lads, who nodded and began practicing among themselves, and then he walked directly to her. Every step was pure purpose, and Marienne felt the familiar warmth spread through her body as he approached. "You should be resting," he said when he got close. but there was no real reprimand in his voice, just loving concern. "I rested all night and all morning, and I'll probably rest again this afternoon because our son is using my bladder as a pillow," she replied with humor. "Can I at least watch my husband be magnificently competent for a few minutes?" Torin laughed, a rich sound she never tired of hearing, and gently pulled her into his arms. His large, calloused hand immediately went to her belly, a gesture so natural now that he didn't even think about it anymore. Protective, connected. "How is he today?" Torin asked, referring to the baby. "Active, strong, stubborn like his father." Marienne leaned against his chest, fitting perfectly as she always did. "Intelligent like his mother, I hope." Torin kissed the top of her head. "The world needs more people who think before they act." Marienne looked up, studying his face in the morning light. There were new lines around his eyes now, from laughing, not from worry. The burden he had carried for so long had softened, replaced by a peace that came from finally belonging somewhere, to someone. Her hand went up, touching the tartan he wore with such pride. "You know our son will grow up wearing these colors?" she said softly. Torin covered her hand with his eyes shining with emotion that he no longer hid. "And he will grow up knowing that true love does not hide, it does not bow, and it never apologizes for existing." Marienne felt tears, those cursed pregnancy hormones, sting her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Then he will be exactly like his father." Torin held her face with both hands, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek with infinite tenderness. "And exactly like his mother, brave, honest, incapable of accepting injustice." He smiled. "God help anyone who tries to oppress him." And then he kissed her, right there in the open courtyard, under the blue Highland sky, with young warriors pretending not to watch and servants smiling as they samatast. He kissed her slowly, deeply, as if they were alone in the world, as if she were the most precious thing he had ever held. When they separated, Marienne rested her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady heartbeat that had become her anchor. "I love you," she whispered. "Today, tomorrow, always. And I love you," Torin replied, his voice husky with emotion. "More than I thought I was capable of, more than words can say." The following years brought more joys, more challenges, more vibrant life to the castle that was once quiet and cold. Their first child was born in August, a dark-haired boy with eyes that promised to be as blue as his father's. They named him Ewan, in honor of Laird MacRae, who had given his blessing to their marriage. 2 years later, a daughter came, a girl with auburn brown hair and amber-green eyes, identical to Marienne's, but with her father's devastating smile. They named her Ilse, an ancient Highland name meaning fairy rock. And 3 years after Ilse, twins, a boy and a girl who brought joyful chaos and endless laughter to every corner of the castle. Marienne governed the lands with a wisdom that impressed even the most skeptical lords, proving repeatedly that women could manage properties as well, or better than men. And Torin protected not only physically, but politically, using connections with the MacRae clan to strengthen alliances and ensure lasting peace. Together, they were an unstoppable force. But life was not just politics and administration. There were small, precious moments that truly defined who they had become. Like the nights when Torin returned from patrol with a fresh cut or bruise, and Marienne would sit him by the fireplace, cleaning and bandaging him with gentle hands, while softly reprimanding him for not being more careful, and he would just smile, letting her care for him because they both knew she needed it as much as he needed her concern. "You have enough scars," she would murmur, kissing an old mark on his shoulder. "Stop collecting new ones." "They are medals," he would reply, pulling her onto his lap. "Each one proves I came back to you." Like the mornings when Marienne woke up to their 4 children jumping on the bed, shouting for attention, and Torin would pretend to be a monster, chasing them around the room, roaring as childish laughter filled the castle. Like the afternoons when she found him reading to the children in the library, using different voices for each character, while small faces watched fascinated. Like the nights when, after the children were asleep, they would sit on the stone wall in front of the main hall, looking at the stars while holding hands, not needing words to express a love that only grew with time. Years also brought challenges, territorial disputes that needed to be negotiated, bad harvests that tested resources, illnesses that brought fear until recovery came. But every obstacle they faced together, and every victory they celebrated together. And through it all, their love remained constant, not static, but alive, growing, evolving with them. On an autumn afternoon, 15 years after the wedding that changed everything, Marienne was in the library organizing documents when Torin entered, now 49 but still strong, still imposing, his dark hair now sprinkled with silver that only made him look more distinguished. He closed the door, and there was something in his gaze, an intensity she recognized, one that still made her heart race even after all these years. "The children are with Duncan," he said, walking towards her. He agreed to keep them busy for a few hours. Marienne smiled, moving away from the desk to meet him halfway. "A few hours? That's generous of him. I thought we deserved it." Torin pulled her into his arms, and she fitted there as she always had, as she always would. To remember why. "We started all this, as if I could forget." But she was smiling, lifting her face to kiss him, and as they kissed there, in the library, where so many of their important conversations had taken place, Marienne realized something essential. They were no longer the same people who first met in that hall, burdened by distrust and wounds. They had grown, changed, healed together. Torin was no longer the warrior who believed he didn't deserve love. He was a husband, a father, a leader who knew that true strength included vulnerability. And Marienne was no longer the widow trapped by circumstances. She was a woman who had chosen her own destiny, who had fought for her happiness, who had proven that love could conquer even the most impossible obstacles. Years later, when their hair was completely grey and grandchildren ran through the same corridors where their children once played, Marienne and Torin often sat on the porch at dusk, watching the sun set over the highlands they both loved so much. Torin remained silent for a long moment, looking at the mountains that witnessed their entire journey. Then, without taking his eyes off the horizon, he said softly, "Sometimes I wonder what life you would have had if I had never crossed those gates." Marienne turned to look at him, truly look. She saw the wrinkles around his eyes that came from laughing. She saw the silver hair he proudly wore. She saw the hands that still held hers firmly, even aged. She saw a lifetime of love in the blue eyes that never lost the ability to make her feel seen, loved, chosen, probably safe, she replied with raw honesty. Respectable, lonely, empty, her fingers intertwined tighter with his. "I would have survived, Torin, as I always did, but I would never have lived." She paused, smiling through tears that were only pure happiness. "And if I could go back, knowing every challenge, every judgmental look, every moment of fear, I would choose you again, without hesitation, because you didn't give me an easier life, you gave me a life worth living." Torin pulled her closer, kissing her temple softly. "I was a lost man before you," he admitted. "I didn't know it. I thought I was living, but I was just existing, just fighting, a warrior, but without a real purpose. You taught me the difference." And there, as the sun painted the sky pink and gold, as the Highland wind whispered through the heather, as the castle behind them was full of love and life and generations to come, they understood something profound. True love was not about grand dramatic gestures or passion that burned fast and died. It was about choosing the same person every day. It was about building a life together brick by brick. It was about seeing the worst in each other and choosing to stay anyway. It was about growing not just together, but because of each other. It was about a widowed countess who refused to be defined by past tragedy and a Highlander warrior who refused to be limited by birth. It was about two people who, against all odds, all expectations, all social rules, found each other and chose to build something extraordinary. And when their story was told, and it would be for generations to come, it would not just be a love story. It would be a story about courage, about genuine honor, not the one dictated by society, but the one that comes from doing the right thing, even when it costs everything, about refusing to accept a life less than the one you deserve. It would be a story about how true love doesn't ask permission, it simply exists. And when two souls brave enough to claim it find each other, neither society, nor tradition, nor fear can stop them. They simply win, together, always. And in the Scottish Highlands, where the wind carries stories across the centuries, this story would be remembered as one of the greatest, the widow and her Highlander, who proved that sometimes the most improbable endings are the most perfect, because they found not just love, they found a home in each other's arms, and that, above all, was what truly mattered. If you walked with us through these highlands of passion, honor, and destiny, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this continue because you keep the flame alive by clicking the hype button and sharing with someone who still believes that true love faces any storm. Because in Einzide, the Highlands and in the heart, the best endings are earned. And now tell me in the comments, what touched you the most on this journey? What would you do in Marienne's place? Or Torin's? Your perspective enriches this valley of stories. Thank you for being here. It's an honor to have you on this journey between mountains, secrets, and loves that defy destiny.